The suitcase lay open on the bed, a beige canvas thing that had already begun to sag at the corners from decades of perfectly ordinary travel. Family weddings, funerals, one ill-fated Mexican resort where the pool turned my bathing suit green. But now it sat there under a different weight entirely. 9 months, 100 ports, every possible climate known to man, and possibly some unknown ones. My socks were already rebelling. "You can't bring that many shirts," Ellen said calmly from the doorway, sipping tea and dressed in the same unflappable navy blue fleece she wears whenever the temperature is anything below ideal. She hadn't packed anything. She never panicked early. It's one of the things I love about her, and also the one that most consistently makes me feel like a malfunctioning human appliance. "I need options," I said, holding up 2 nearly identical checkered button-downs, as if I were weighing diplomacy with North Korea. "You don't wear short sleeves." "I might." "Not in public." "Fair enough." I jammed them both in and closed the lid. Just to be safe, I unzipped it again and added a third pair of socks. That brought the grand total to 12. For 270 days, in 6 continents, I started sweating. By noon, we were at Canada Place, shuffling along a serpentine line of retirees, luggage, and rolling oxygen tanks with more discipline than any military formation I'd ever seen. I was on my 3rd check of my important items pouch, passport, wallet, cruise ID, emergency Werther's Originals, when I realized Stan had brought a cooler. "Got maple smoked salmon in there," he said, grinning as he balanced it on top of his roller bag, which was festooned with bumper stickers from previous road trips. "Yukon or bust. Go loonies. I break for borscht." "You know they'll confiscate that, right?" said Paul, who was already wearing his shore excursion hat. He has a special hat for shore excursions. It has zippered pockets. He's the kind of man who enjoys cross-referencing bus timetables against historical weather patterns. Stan waved a dismissive hand. "Not if I distract them with charm." Next to him, Bobby rolled her eyes so hard I heard it. The MV Grand Odyssey came into view as we rounded the final security checkpoint. And by God, it was ridiculous. I don't know what I'd expected. A ship, obviously. But this was more like a modern-day Tower of Babel. Decks stacked on decks, swimming pools on swimming pools, a giant glass dome in the center, satellite dishes like ears pointed skyward. It was white and gleaming and built, apparently, to accommodate not just a few thousand people, but their whims, allergies, trivia needs, and slot machine addictions. "She's beautiful," Denise breathed behind me, filming the ship for her Instagram. She already had a filter on. She's one of those people who experiences reality in preview mode. Claudia appeared out of nowhere, the ship's cruise enrichment coordinator, wearing a branded windbreaker, name tag, and a smile so forceful it could be used in crowd control. "Welcome to the Grand Odyssey," she chirped. "We are just thrilled to have you. Don't forget to check your daily voyage vibrations bulletin for onboard happenings, themed nights, and mindfulness workshops." Stan gave her a look that could wither houseplants. We finally reached the gangway. I patted my chest pocket where my passport usually lived and felt nothing. Ellen didn't say anything. She just looked at me with the face of a woman who had long ago predicted this moment and had filed it away somewhere next to "that time you brought us to the wrong wedding." It turned up in the secondary pouch of my vest, beneath a receipt from Lee's Donuts and an expired Costco coupon. The crew member took it with the blank efficiency of someone who had already seen 6 forgotten passports, 1 weeping woman, and at least 2 emotional support chihuahuas today. The first step onto the ship was oddly quiet. Carpet, mood lighting, Muzak rendition of Clocks by Coldplay, and the overwhelming scent of lemon-scented sanitizer and Parmesan cheese. Somewhere below us, the lunch buffet was already open, and someone, probably from Winnipeg, had found the pasta station and was abusing the tongs. The cabins weren't ready yet, so we migrated en masse to the observation lounge on deck 12. It was floor-to-ceiling glass, and you could see the entire city behind us. The skyline, the cranes, the mountains still dusted with snow like smug white shoulders, and out front the harbor, slowly parting like a theater curtain. Stan cracked a beer from his cooler before anyone could stop him. "Here's to it," he said. to the high seas, to getting the hell off the continent. We raised glasses. I had sparkling water. Ellen had something with ginger in it. Denise had a canned spritz with hibiscus notes. Paul was already mapping our latitude. And then we moved. The ship pulled away with a surprising grace, engines rumbling so deep it felt like they were under our ribs. Slowly, we glided past the harbor's edge, the gulls, the seaplanes. The Lions Gate Bridge approached like a test, low and stately, green and indifferent. "Do you think we'll fit under that?" I asked. "You ask that every time we drive to North Van," Ellen said. And then we did, barely. The entire lounge held its collective breath for a heartbeat, and then cheers erupted as if we'd accomplished something brave rather than simply surviving math. Out on the viewing deck, someone, possibly Denise, was already crying. Whether from joy or from an allergic reaction to the gluten-free shrimp toast was unclear. I took Ellen's hand, even though it was slightly sticky from her drink. Behind us, the city shrank. Ahead, the world, enormous and oddly shaped, waited. My shoes were already too tight. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed a live squirrel, and we had only 99 ports to go. By the time we docked in Ketchikan, my shoes had evolved from too tight to medieval punishment. It wasn't entirely the shoes' fault. They had been designed for sidewalks, not the kind of slippery, sea-slick metal staircases that form the lower intestines of a cruise ship. Still, I limped off the gangway like a man returning from battle. Ellen, of course, moved with the effortless grace of someone who had apparently packed waterproof orthopedic sneakers. The town greeted us with what I can only describe as weaponized rain. It wasn't falling, it was charging sideways. The entire sky appeared to be coming down in damp sheeting waves, like someone upstairs had decided to just flip Alaska over and shake it out. "This is refreshing!" Denise yelled through the wind. Her raincoat cinched so tight she resembled a cranberry in a garbage bag. "Are we being punished?" Stan asked, pulling his hood over his trucker cap. "Did one of you vote for something stupid? Be honest." I attempted to deploy the umbrella I'd just purchased from the ship's gift shop, a collapsible novelty number shaped like a bald eagle, because I had made the critical error of shopping while undercaffeinated. When opened, the eagle's head popped up from the apex with a frankly disturbing expression, like it had seen things it could never forget. I clicked it open just in time for a gust of wind to invert it with such violence that it slapped me directly across the face. "I told you to get the poncho," Ellen said, stepping slightly away from me. "But no, the umbrella was symbolic." "It is symbolic," I said, wrestling the mangled thing back into shape. "It represents the futility of man. You're dripping on your own glasses." Ketchikan itself was charming, or at least it would have been if visible. Through the downpour, we glimpsed brightly painted clapboard shops lined along the harbor, narrow boardwalks raised on pilings, and fishing boats bobbing morosely in the chop. It all had the look of a postcard left out in the rain. Our itinerary had optimistically listed options like salmon hatchery, lumberjack show, and creekside stroll. Instead, the 8 of us huddled under the canvas awning of a shop called Totem and Trinket, where we dripped steadily onto the welcome mat and squinted at a fogged-up map that looked like someone had tried to iron it with a haddock. Bobby, ever the pragmatist, handed out hand warmers like communion wafers. Ellen wandered off. "Where is she going?" I asked, turning to see my wife disappear into a side alley flanked by carved poles and a flashing open sign. "Gift shop," Paul said. "No," I said, narrowing my eyes. "That's not a gift shop walk. That's a discovery walk." I went after her. What she'd found was actually rather lovely. Tucked behind the souvenir drag was a totem carving studio, open to visitors but clearly not designed for them. The floor smelled of wet cedar and coffee. Shavings curled across the floor in golden whirls. At the back, a woman in jeans and a wool sweater stood hunched over a massive length of wood, slowly revealing the face of a raven. Ellen stood quietly just inside the doorway, her hood down now, her hair wet and curling at the edges. "This is incredible," she whispered. I nodded, partly in agreement, partly because I didn't want to speak too loudly and ruin whatever spell was in the air. The artist looked up and smiled. "You're early," she said. "Early for what?" I asked. "Everything," she said, and went back to carving. Back outside, the rest of the group was causing a small disturbance. Stan had wandered into a drone-guided walking tour, one of those groups that moves silently as a headset-wearing leader directs them through the streets while narrating via Bluetooth. Stan, unaware, had inserted himself into the group around the cannery district and was now walking backward in front of them, trying to correct the guide's commentary. "No, see, the salting plant was moved after the fire. You're thinking of the wrong decade, fella." "He's not talking to you," Bruce said, appearing from behind a bin of whale fridge magnets. "He's talking to all of us," Stan huffed. "We've paid our taxes. That makes us shareholders." Bobby grabbed him by the sleeve and steered him toward the chowder shop. We ended the day huddled around a table at Pilot House Soup, a former bait shack turned eatery where the chowder was hot, thick, and almost certainly a major contributor to coronary blockages. But by God, it was perfect. Outside, the rain still whipped across the harbor like a lasso, and the ship loomed in the mist, lit up like a floating casino. Inside, it was all warm wood, steamed windows, and salt-crusted laughter. I looked down at my bowl and realized I hadn't stopped smiling since the first spoonful. "Worth it," I said aloud. "To what?" Ellen asked. "All of it," I said. "Even the Eagle umbrella. You still have bits of it stuck to your glasses." "Symbolic," I muttered. I woke up to the unmistakable sound of a foghorn and the equally unmistakable smell of scrambled eggs prepared in industrial quantities, which is to say, faintly of rubber and sorrow. We were docked in Kodiak, which I'd mentally filed under Bear Island during my pre-trip reading binge. According to several websites I had skimmed and promptly forgotten, it had the largest concentration of brown bears anywhere in the known universe. Naturally, we had signed up for a bear viewing tour. Naturally, I had forgotten my jacket. Ellen, wrapped in a windproof coat that might have been made of weatherproofed angels, looked at me with the kind of sympathy normally reserved for shivering poodles. "You're gonna die out there," she said cheerfully. Carol, overhearing, handed me a spare fleece from her day pack. It was light gray and smelled faintly of lavender, peppermint gum, and what I assumed was the inside of a therapist's car. "It's my travel fleece," she said. "Comfort layers are important. Don't be ashamed." "I'm not ashamed," I lied, zipping it up. "It's just emotionally textured." Our tour guide met us at the dock wearing a vest that said Wild Side Kodiak, which felt like a lot to promise before 10 a.m. He introduced himself as Craig and told us, in rapid-fire Alaskan, that bears were never guaranteed, but he'd do his level best. This sounded like something a surgeon might say before a high-risk operation or what a magician says before sawing his cousin in half. We piled into a muddy van that smelled like fish and hand sanitizer and drove inland on something that could, charitably, be called a road. As we bounced along, Craig told us fascinating facts. Kodiak bears can weigh over 1,400 pounds. They eat salmon, berries, and, according to Craig, whatever isn't paying attention. One time, a bear had eaten an entire kayak. Not the person, just the kayak. Craig seemed both amused and personally insulted by this. The bear viewing platform turned out to be a small wooden deck near a stream, where the salmon, in theory, ran like nature's vending machines. We stood in silence for 40 minutes, watching water burble and eagles circle overhead. Eventually, something rustled in the brush. "Bear!" someone hissed. We all turned. It was a squirrel, a rather confident one, to be fair. He stared us down like a bar bouncer and then casually chewed a mushroom, completely unbothered by our binoculars and long lenses. Stan was apoplectic. "I paid $87 for this," he grumbled. "We have squirrels in Coquitlam." "You don't have this squirrel," Bruce said. "He's clearly the alpha." Denise took a picture anyway. "I'm putting him on Instagram. I'm calling him Barry." "Barry the Bearless," Paul added. The squirrel winked. "I swear to God." Back on the ship, things went sideways at the buffet. It started innocently enough. Bobby wanted shrimp cocktail, which was displayed under a sad little sneeze guard and a bed of ice, arranged like the casualties of a luxury seafood disaster. There were tongs. There were also small metal serving spoons for those inclined toward civility. Bobby, unconcerned, used the tongs, then also the spoon, then, in a moment of inexplicable bravado, her own fork, to rescue the ones at the back. From behind her, a voice emerged. crisp frightened, possibly from Calgary. "Excuse me, ma'am, we are sharing those." What followed was not quite a confrontation, more a standoff involving cold crustaceans and long-standing cultural norms around buffet etiquette. Bobby, to her credit, did not escalate. She merely turned, smiled, and said, "You can have the shrimp. I've seen things today." The woman backed away like Bobby had rabies. Stan clapped. The staff pretended to reorganize the melon tray. Later that night, full of soup and shrimp and vaguely traumatized by Craig's squirrel, I stood out on the balcony with Ellen. Kodiak's lights twinkled softly in the dark distance, and the air smelled like pine, seawater, and wood smoke. The mountains behind the harbor loomed like dark folded paper. "Do you think we'll ever see a bear?" I asked. "We saw Barry," Ellen said. "I think that counts." "I guess," I said. "He did have a sort of swagger." "He had presence," she said, "more than most people." We stood there a while quietly. Then I sniffed. "Do you still smell lavender? That's your soul healing." There's Bleak and then there's Dutch Harbor. We arrived around breakfast to what I can only describe as the color gray. Not in an emotional sense. Literally, everything was gray. The sea, the sky, the land. Even the buildings appeared to be painted in various shades of industrial resignation. The MV Grand Odyssey docked with a gentle mechanical groan, and we shuffled ashore into a world that looked like it had once starred in a Cold War thriller, but had since retired quietly to an unheated trailer. "Looks like the kind of place where secrets are buried," Bruce muttered, delighted. Paul, ever the municipal enthusiast, pointed out the storm drains. "Functional but clearly overwhelmed," he said, squinting into a rivulet. "Very honest infrastructure." Denise made a noise that might have been agreement or a muffled sneeze. We wandered into town like survivors of a slow-moving apocalypse. The wind came at us sideways, full of the smell of diesel, kelp, and untold fish. There were a few scattered shops, a military-looking building, and a small museum whose hand-painted sign read, "Open if door is unlocked." Bobby veered toward a low, squat shed that had a sign, "Live crab, no returns. Ask for Wayne." Naturally, she went in. Wayne, bearded, flanneled, and smoking a cigarette with the air of a man deeply suspicious of happiness, emerged 5 minutes later carrying a bucket of what appeared to be furious underwater spiders. "They're feisty today," he said. "Means they're fresh." "How much?" Bobby asked. $15 a pound, cash only, no funny business." "What would the funny business be?" Ellen asked. "Exactly," he replied and went back inside. Meanwhile, Ellen and Denise had vanished. One moment they were with us, the next, poof, gone, like rational conversation during trivia night. They'd gone in search of a restroom, following a trail of hand-painted signs that read WC Aero, taped to various dumpsters and phone poles. The trail led into what appeared to be a maritime equipment warehouse. They did not emerge for 35 minutes. We eventually found them inside, sipping hot coffee from a vending machine in the employee break room and chatting amiably with a forklift operator named Jude. "He used to work on a crab boat," Ellen said when I found them. "Lost a toe. He's very philosophical about it." "He let us use the staff bathroom," Denise added. "It was pretty intense, but the water pressure was amazing." Back outside, the rain had thickened to soggy confetti, and people were starting to peel off. Paul had developed a theory that Bruce was strategically umbrella hogging, stepping just far enough ahead to be covered while the rest of us remained defenseless. "You drift," Paul accused, poking him. "I stride," Bruce countered. "It's called leadership." Carol was scribbling something in her notebook, possibly a diagnosis, possibly the names of those she would leave behind in the event of sudden flooding. Back aboard the ship, soaked and slightly windswept, we convened at the portside cafe, where Bobby smuggled in her bucket of crabs and began cleaning them with surgical precision using her Swiss Army knife. Claudia passed by and raised an eyebrow. "Don't worry," Bobby said. "I'm a professional." Claudia did not ask what kind of professional. She simply smiled and walked away very quickly. That night, as we pulled away from Dutch Harbor, the clouds parted just enough to reveal a volcanic ridge bathed in the bruised pink of the setting sun. Me, stood on the outer deck in a borrowed windbreaker, holding a cup of something hot that might have once been cocoa, but now tasted faintly of fish. Ellen joined me. Her cheeks were pink from the wind, her scarf askew. "I like that place," she said quietly. "You like Dutch Harbor?" She nodded. It was honest. I nodded too. And crab forward. We stood there a moment, the last fingers of Alaska fading behind us, the open Pacific ahead. "I still can't feel my toes," I said. "Symbolic," she replied. There's a particular kind of maritime silence that doesn't quite exist anywhere else, a hollow, heavy stillness that seems to absorb even the sound of thought. We were 2 days into our crossing of the North Pacific, and the ship was slicing through an infinite slab of gray that looked identical in every direction. No birds, no boats, no sign of life. "I think we're in purgatory," I said to no one in particular as we ate breakfast beneath an artificial sky dome that piped in rainforest noises for reasons I couldn't begin to guess. Ellen was reading the day's Voyage Vibrations bulletin and had just discovered we could attend a beginner's tap dance workshop on Deck 8. "Tempted?" she asked, not looking up. "I once sprained my ankle tripping over a beach ball," I said. "I don't think the rhythm arts are my calling." She folded the bulletin neatly and tucked it beside her granola. The fog arrived on day 3. A complete whiteout. Like someone had erased the ocean and simply left us floating in a blank sheet of printer paper. It gave everything a kind of dreamlike unreality. The decks were quieter. People moved slower. Even the staff seemed to glide, as if the ship had become a haunted spa. I became obsessed with spotting another ship, any ship, just something to prove the rest of the world still existed. "There's nothing out there," I muttered, squinting through the observation lounge's rain-slick windows. "Statistically, we should have seen at least one freighter." "You sound like a conspiracy theorist," Carol said from behind a Sudoku. "Next you'll be claiming the moon landing was faked." "I'm just saying." "We're in the middle of the ocean, George," Ellen said gently. "It's allowed to be empty." I grumbled into my tea. Paul handed me his binoculars. They did not help. To break up the ennui, Bruce gave an unsanctioned lecture in the theater lounge titled "Whaling, a Tragic Legacy." He had prepared slides, which Claudia was not pleased about. "This was not on the schedule," she hissed, checking her clipboard. "I have mindful clay shaping at 3:15 p.m. Bruce ignored her and clicked to a photo of a 19th century whaling ship under full sail. Bobby fell asleep midway through his discussion of harpoon metallurgy. Stan tried to submit a question on a napkin. Could they not have just fished for something less horrible? Bruce responded with a 12-minute anecdote about the economic significance of Baleen. The 5th night was formal night, which, according to Voyage Vibrations, meant elegant attire paired with nautical flair. I was not entirely sure what that meant, so I rented a tuxedo from the onboard shop. It was 2 sizes too small. I looked like a ventriloquist dummy who'd been fired from a jazz band. Ellen, on the other hand, wore a navy blue dress I hadn't seen in years. She looked completely elegant, effortless, the kind of woman who would receive complimentary appetizers in a foreign language, and not because she asked. "You look good," she said. "I can't sit down." "You'll stand handsomely then." Dinner was lobster bisque, filet mignon, and a trio of something that might have been dessert if you closed your eyes and believed in mousse. We shared a table with a couple from Edmonton who were living off grid except for the cruise. "They make their own toothpaste," Denise whispered afterward. Back in the lounge, a string quartet played Coldplay songs in a minor key, and I stood by the window, once again staring into the fog. And then, as if summoned by my irritation, another ship appeared, distant, dark, barely visible on the horizon, a ghost freighter, gone within 5 minutes. "I saw one," I whispered. "Good for you," Ellen said, looping her arm through mine. We stood like that a while. Neither of us mentioned that the ballroom was playing our wedding song. The next night, Stan organized a poker game in the card room. He'd brought actual chips, the ceramic kind, and insisted on using Canadian Tire gift cards as ante. It was a simple 5-card draw, but things quickly devolved after Paul accused Carol of emotional bluffing, and Bobby tried to cash out with a souvenir spoon. Bruce demanded a ruling from the ship's casino staff. They did not have jurisdiction. The game was suspended indefinitely. I'm just saying, Stan muttered as we left, in international waters, we should be allowed to duel. By the end of the Pacific crossing, I had accepted the fog as a kind of mood. Not good, not bad, just neutral, endless waiting with lobster bisque and occasional music. When the voyage vibrations bulletin announced landfall approaching Sapporo tomorrow, I felt something stir. A sense of arrival, of direction, of maybe, finally, getting my tux off. They announced the Petropavlovsk stop during breakfast. There was no ceremony, no marching band, no themed Danish at the buffet, just a small printed sign by the omelet station. Due to minor itinerary adjustments, the MV Grand Odyssey will stop today in Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, Russian Far East. All passengers wishing to disembark must do so with ship ID, passport, and willingness to embrace ambiguity. Where is that? Stan asked, chewing a blueberry muffin like it had personally wronged him. Kamchatka, Bruce said, already tapping something into his tablet. It's on the Pacific Ring of Fire, volcanic, Soviet, rather remote. Is it safe? Denise asked. Statistically, Bruce said, it's safer than downtown Edmonton. Denise didn't look reassured. From the upper deck, Petropavlovsk looked like a dystopian postcard. Clusters of concrete apartment blocks staggered across snow-dusted hills, with enormous volcanoes rising directly behind them like ancient sentinels. We disembarked into an air that smelled of diesel, cold stone, and something like smoked radish. A local brass band played what I assume was the Russian national anthem, though it could have also been the overture to an action movie set in a refrigerator factory. There were 2 kiosks. One sold wool socks and postcards of Lenin. The other sold nothing and was staffed by a man eating a banana with the intensity of a political statement. Our guide, Galina, introduced herself with the gleeful chaos of a woman who had spent many years waiting for a tour group to arrive and was now determined to use every single fact she'd ever learned, whether we wanted it or not. "Welcome, my new snowflakes," she shouted in slightly breathless English. "Today we see the bones of the sleeping dragon, the soul of the East." Stan leaned toward me. "She's either a poet or clinically unstable." I nodded, both admiring and slightly afraid. We began with the Museum of Volcanoes and Cold War Patriotism, which was held in what may once have been a kindergarten. The signage was largely hand-painted. The floor tiles creaked. A taxidermied lynx stared at us from the lobby with judgment in its glassy eyes. Galina led us past dioramas of lava flows, grainy photos of heroic dog sled teams, and a scale model of the peninsula made entirely of painted styrofoam. "This is Tolbachik," she shouted, tapping a tiny volcano with a pencil. "She erupted in 1975 and again in 2012. She is fierce like Babushka, but proud." Bobby leaned toward Ellen. "I think I love her." "I want her to narrate my life," Ellen whispered back. The tour eventually devolved into a heated discussion about whether a certain wartime bunker was genuine or reconstructed using similar emotional materials. Paul got visibly annoyed. Bruce tried to interpret a plaque using his high school Russian and mistranslated it as "Victory comes for those who bake." George, me, found himself alone in a corner, staring at a faded photo of 3 men standing beside a melted Jeep, all of them grinning like mad scientists. The caption was in Cyrillic. I had no idea what it meant, but I couldn't stop looking at it. It felt like something. Like the world before the internet, before itineraries, before cruise ships with bowling alleys. Just wind and fire, and a group of people who didn't know how far they could go until they'd already gone too far. Back in town, Ellen bought a Matryoshka doll from a vendor in a tent who accepted only rubles, US dollars, or a really good chocolate bar. She paid with a Twix. "Who's it for?" I asked. She paused. "Nora." "Nora from book club?" Ellen nodded. "I thought you didn't like Nora." "I don't," she said. "But she'll ask if I brought her anything, and I want to say yes, without actually being generous." "That's elegant." "I'm a librarian," she said. "We play a long game." We reboarded the ship in silence, wind pulling at our sleeves, snow threatening from above. From the deck, Petropavlovsk looked exactly the same as it had when we arrived. Concrete, volcanic, improbable. It feels like a place you only get to see once, I said. Ellen nodded. And even then, you're not sure it was real. I still don't know what we saw in that museum. I don't think we were supposed to. We stood there a long time until the ship pulled away, the gray swallowing the city behind us like a secret. The morning we arrived in Sapporo, I woke up to sunlight. Actual sunlight, not that diffused, apologetic Pacific version that slinks in like it owes you money. This was clean, bright, decisive light, slicing across our cabin window and igniting a faint sense of optimism in my otherwise stiff lower back. I drew the curtain and gasped. Ellen sat up. Is it on fire? No, I whispered. It's functional. She peered out beside me. Outside, the harbor was immaculately arranged. Cranes moved in gentle synchronicity. Workers in identical jumpsuits bustled about with purpose. Every bollard was painted, every line painted with geometric perfection. Even the seagulls appeared coordinated. This isn't a port, I said. It's a diagram of a port. Ellen yawned. That's Japan for you. Stepping onto Japanese soil was like entering a parallel reality where someone had run a system diagnostic on society and fixed all the bugs. There was no shouting, no clutter, no honking. Even the wind felt courteous. Paul immediately launched into a walking tour using a pocket guidebook he'd bought at the ship library. Denise drifted into a photo-taking trance. Stan was muttering about not trusting cities where the garbage bins don't have graffiti. Bobby, meanwhile, was looking for a pharmacy to replace the cough drops she insisted had expired emotionally. I was focused on the vending machines. They were everywhere, glowing towers of wonder, humming softly on every corner like benevolent robots. They didn't just sell drinks. They sold umbrellas, noodles, socks, things I couldn't even identify. One seemed to contain mini rice cookers. I'm getting something, I told Ellen. Please don't buy pants from a vending machine. I pressed a button at random. A can dropped. It was labeled in Japanese, with a small illustration of corn and steam. I cracked it open and took a sip. It was hot corn soup from a machine. It's magnificent, I whispered. I'm so proud of you, Ellen said, as if I had just solved a moral riddle. After an hour of marveling at order and being politely bowed at by shopkeepers, we found ourselves in front of a ramen restaurant whose sign featured a cartoon pig holding a ladle and what appeared to be a fire hose of noodles. Looks reputable, Bobby said. We stepped inside to discover we had to order from a touchscreen kiosk, which issued us numbered tickets like we were entering a lottery. This is efficient, Paul said. This is combat dining, Stan muttered. The machine only had Japanese and French as language options for some reason. Bruce attempted translation and ordered what he thought was spicy miso pork with egg. He received cold noodles with mountain yam and a raw quail egg floating ominously like a drowned marble. Denise got exactly what she wanted and was unbearably serene about it. My ramen was spectacular, broth like velvet, noodles with a gentle chew, chashu pork that made me reconsider most of my past life choices. I tried to take a photo, but Ellen was already halfway through hers and looked up with a glazed, euphoric expression. Should we just move here? I asked. No, she said. We'd ruin it. Later, we stood at a massive crosswalk in central Sapporo, watching as hundreds of people crossed in unison from every corner like a living mandala. There were no collisions, no jostling, just synchronized urban ballet. Stan was speechless. Bruce looked like he was going to cry. Carol whispered, "This is the most soothing thing I've ever seen." I stepped out into the sea of humans, swept along by motion and politeness and the low, gentle pings of walk signals. And for a brief, fleeting moment, I didn't feel like a tourist. I just felt small and peaceful and in exactly the right place. When we reached the other side, Ellen looked at me. "You're grinning," she said. I was. I really was. Nagasaki greeted us like a well-dressed ghost, calm, precise, quietly humming, and carrying a story it wasn't quite sure we were ready to hear. It was beautiful in the way old cities often are. Not showy, not bragging, just present. Hilltops stitched with green, trams painted in pastels, cherry blossoms that hadn't gotten the seasonal memo and were blooming early just to remind us that nature does what it wants. "Why does this feel sacred?" Denise asked as we stepped off the gangway. "Because it is," Ellen said softly. We had booked what was advertised in the voyage vibrations as a city overview tour with cultural stops and optional museum visit. What we got was a 3-hour atomic reckoning, narrated by a guide named Kazuko, who had the voice of a violin and the eyes of someone who had decided long ago never to water things down. We started at Peace Park, a place so quiet you could hear your own memory rustling. The Peace statue stood in the center, tall, serene, one arm extended to the sky, the other folded in silent warning. Paul stood very still for a long time. Then he took off his hat, then his glasses. Then he cried, quietly, as though his heart had loosened a bolt he hadn't realized was tight. No one said anything, not even Stan. The Atomic Bomb Museum was next, dark, silent, subterranean. It didn't apologize for itself. It didn't dramatize. It just told. Melted glass, charred lunchboxes, photographs of skyless mornings and walls without shadows. Bobby held onto Bruce's arm. Carol walked slowly with her head down. I found myself staring at a blackened tricycle and forgetting how to blink. There was a small auditorium playing a documentary from 1983, complete with earnest voiceovers and grainy interviews. It was in Japanese, English, and French, each version layered just enough over the others to make the narrative feel like a dream you weren't sure you were meant to understand. Ellen sat beside me, not moving, not speaking. When we emerged back into the sun, the air felt different. Or maybe we did. Kazuko offered a final stop at a small shrine up a flight of winding steps. I volunteered. Only Paul and I followed her. Everyone else retreated to the comfort of soft chairs and ice cream back at the pier. The shrine was quiet, shaded, smelling of stone and pine and incense. A cat sat near the entrance. I nodded at it in what I hoped was a respectful cross-cultural gesture. It blinked, got up, turned around, and presented its tail to me. "I think I was just dismissed," I said. Paul, still wearing his tour sticker, patted my shoulder. Even cats have boundaries. Back on the ship, Stan was outraged to discover that the sandwich shop he'd been searching for all day had been 1 block away from the Peace Park. "Do you know how close I was to eating yakitori-flavored peanuts for lunch?" "That sounds innovative," Carol said. "I wanted a sandwich." "You got perspective," Ellen said. "I wanted a sandwich," Stan repeated. That night, dinner was unusually quiet. The ship gently pulled out into the bay, leaving Nagasaki behind like a page we'd carefully turned. I looked at Ellen across the table. She wasn't smiling, but she was very much there, and so was I, which somehow felt like enough. Taipei landed in my senses like a fever dream wrapped in citrus. The moment we stepped off the ship, it hit us. Humidity, thick and immediate, like someone had wrung out a warm sponge over your head and called it atmosphere. The air buzzed faintly. Electric cables, street food, mopeds, everything humming in layered frequencies you could almost taste. "I feel like I'm walking through a hot cloud of soy sauce," Stan muttered, squinting. "It's character," Carol replied, already photographing a tiled drainage ditch. The group split early. Paul and Denise had a cultural markets tour, read Planned Consumerism. Bobby wanted to visit something called the Taipei Eye. I think it involves puppets and possibly ghosts. And Stan announced his intention to walk until something weird happens. Bruce and Carol stuck to their itinerary, laminated and bullet-pointed. Ellen and I, however, decided to wing it. A rare act of rebellion for me, considering I usually can't cross a plaza without a route, a printed map, and a backup map in case of wind. We started walking. Taipei is the kind of city where you can turn a corner and suddenly be in a different decade. 1 minute, neon. The next, potted ferns and crumbling tile. The third, a temple staircase rising out of nowhere like a secret invitation from gravity. Ellen pointed at it. "Shall we?" I thought we were avoiding cardio. "We're not avoiding meaning." She was right, of course. I sighed, adjusted my bag, and followed her up what turned out to be approximately 4,000 damp stone steps into a pocket of serenity called Jianguo Temple, though I only learned the name from a passing monk who handed me a pamphlet and a small wrapped candy. The temple was nearly empty. A red courtyard, paper lanterns, a low, open hall with carved pillars and sandalwood smoke curling skyward in slow, purposeful spirals. There was no guided tour, no signage in English, just the quiet. I sat on a wooden bench near a koi pond and listened to the water ripple. Ellen disappeared for a while, exploring, and I just sat. For 15 whole minutes, I thought nothing, did nothing, and asked nothing of the moment, which for me is basically enlightenment. Our next move was to hail a taxi, which we did with the skill of two people who have never hailed anything that wasn't already trying to sell them a mattress. The driver nodded as I pointed at a noodle shop on a screenshot. He nodded again, then made a sharp right into what I believe was a tunnel through time. Taipei blurred past in a kaleidoscope of overpasses, night markets, concrete jungle, and flashing characters I could not read but deeply respected. 20 minutes later, he deposited us in front of a narrow alley lit by a single red lantern. Inside, heaven in bowl form. No English menu. No tourists. Just steam and slurping. We pointed at other people's bowls. The cook nodded once and began. What arrived was a shallow ceramic dish of hand-pulled noodles, scallion oil, slow-braised beef, and something dark and earthy that tasted like memory and forgiveness. I took one bite and genuinely considered sending an apology email to every bowl of spaghetti I'd ever praised. Ellen watched me, eyes twinkling. You're having a moment. I think I love Taiwan. Back at the ship, we reassembled. Denise had wept over the lanterns at the night market. They're just so glowing, she explained. Bobby showed off a haunted-looking puppet. Stan had tried to cleanse himself in a feng shui fountain, only to be scolded by a local and very nearly arrested. I wasn't even submerged, he insisted. You sat in it, Bruce said. That's considered submersion. That evening, as the skyline receded behind us in a golden mist, I leaned on the balcony rail, feet sore, heart a little raw. Ellen came beside me, holding 2 cups of barley tea. She handed one over. I looked at her, then out at the city behind us. I didn't plan any of today, I said. And yet, she said, sipping, and yet. Kaohsiung has the kind of cheerfulness that makes you slightly suspicious. Everything is bright. The buildings, the scooters, the public art installations that look like inflatable flamingos, but are apparently commentary on civic resilience. The metro stations are colorful and clean, with actual musical cues when trains arrive. It felt, frankly, like a children's show set in a tropical dictatorship of cheer. Stan immediately tried to rent a scooter. I want to live like a local, he said. You once broke your toe on a Swiffer, Bobby replied. Exactly. I've evolved. Carol had already wandered off in the direction of a public sculpture shaped like a prawn and was sketching something in a notebook labeled My Quiet Disappointments. Ellen and I made our way to the Dragon and Tiger pagodas, because apparently when a city offers a giant fiberglass tiger that you can walk through, you don't ignore that. The pagodas were magnificent. Candy-colored towers rising above a lotus pond, complete with tiled dragons, tiled tigers, tiled everything. It was like stepping into the world's most devout and wildly imaginative aquarium. You're supposed to enter through the dragon's mouth and exit through the tiger's, Ellen read aloud. What happens if you do it the other way? You court misfortune. Why is misfortune always an option? Because you never read signs. At a nearby temple bookstore, Ellen found a Taiwanese woman named Jia who sold her a handmade notebook stitched with cloud patterns and gave her a 10-minute lecture on the difference between 3 types of incense. I didn't understand half of it, Ellen said, but I feel spiritually reorganized. I, meanwhile, had bought a steamed custard bun the size of a regulation softball. We sat in a shaded park, watching locals walk perfectly coiffed dogs and do what looked like synchronized arm aerobics. I bit into the bun. It exploded. Not metaphorically, There was literal detonation. Hot custard burst down my wrist, onto my shirt, and then onto the bench, which immediately became a war zone of stickiness. A passing child pointed and said something in Mandarin that I believe translated roughly to, "That foreigner is under attack." We regrouped at the Luhe night market, where the food was plentiful, the music loud, and everything slightly glistening. Claudia, the ship's enrichment coordinator, appeared out of nowhere like a khaki-clad ghost and said, "There's a karaoke tent ahead. You all should represent the Odyssey." Denise's eyes went wild. "What's the song list?" "Mostly classics." 10 minutes later, she was belting Dancing Queen in front of a crowd of politely bewildered teenagers, while Paul did backup finger choreography like a man trying to signal aircraft with jazz hands. George, me, was roped in for a duet with Carol. Endless love. I took the low parts. She whispered the high ones. It was haunting, in a gently uncomfortable way. Stan signed up for Born to be Wild, got lost in the second verse, and improvised something about licorice and trout farming. He got a standing ovation. As we walked back toward the shuttle, full of mystery meat, fermented soy, and emotional disarray, Ellen looked at me and said, "You know you still have custard on your elbow, right?" "I'm keeping it," I said. "It's symbolic." "What of?" "Joy, mistakes, sweetness. The whole day." "That's absurd." "Exactly." Manila was too much and not enough all at once. The heat was an actual presence, thick, conversational, uninvited, and the traffic didn't so much flow as vibrate, every honk a punctuation mark in a sentence no one was willing to finish. Jeepneys glinted in the sun like rolling jukeboxes, street food hissed, air conditioners wept onto the sidewalk, and I, George Lancaster, was already sweating through my third shirt of the day. "This is like being inside someone else's fever dream," I muttered, fanning myself with a free tourist map that had already disintegrated. "You should hydrate," Ellen said, without looking up from her phone. "According to the cruise app, humidity is at 98%. "Then I'm not dehydrating," I said. "I'm becoming part of the atmosphere." The plan, and I use that word loosely, was to let Paul lead a walking tour of Intramuros, Manila's old Spanish quarter. He had printed maps, backup maps, an annotated list of historical buildings, and a pack of wet wipes he referred to as tactical. We lost him in under 7 minutes. The moment we turned a corner past a small army of schoolchildren wearing matching neon visors, he disappeared, either taken by enthusiasm or the need for an unscheduled museum detour. "I told him to stay on the main road," Denise huffed, already scanning alley signs. "He is the main road," Stan muttered, dabbing sweat from his forehead with a Canadian flag bandana. Bobby, meanwhile, had eaten a mango from a street vendor with such emotional commitment that the man tried to sell her his last 3. "I'm not sure if it was fruit or a religious experience," she said. "That's how they get you," Bruce replied. "The sugar gets in your brain." I wandered off. Not deliberately. I saw a faded plaque on a stone wall, took one step closer, and the crowd swallowed me like a warm, citrus-scented tide. I wandered for a while, through small plazas, down alleys, past basketball courts and noodle stands, guided by nothing except the vague instinct that I wasn't entirely lost, just paused. Eventually, I ducked into a cool, tiled archway behind a bakery and found myself in a small courtyard with a shrine built into the far wall, rusted iron, moss-covered, with incense sticks in an old Coke bottle and a line of ceramic angels missing various limbs. And there, sitting squarely in the middle of the shrine, like he owned the rights to reality, was a black cat. Not mangy, not wild, not casual. This cat looked at me the way librarians look at people who have asked where the vampire books are. "I mean, no offense," I said aloud, because it felt wrong not to. The cat blinked once, slowly. Then it stood, stretched, and, I swear this is true, walked over, tapped its head against my shin, and left, like a monk clocking out for lunch. I sat down on the ledge. The shrine didn't explain itself. The incense didn't burn. The Coke bottle stayed still, but I felt something shift, like my brain finally closed an app it had left running since 1997. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, I stood up, thanked the shrine, just in case, and made my way back through the city, by following the smell of grilled banana leaves. Back with the group, Paul had reappeared with a sunburn and 3 brochures. Denise was wearing a hat she clearly regretted buying. Stan had taken 1 bite of Baloo, declared it egg forward, and now refused to speak of it again. "Where were you?" Ellen asked. "Found a shrine." She smiled. "Did it tell you anything?" "No, but a cat did." "Of course it did." Barachai looked fake. I don't say that lightly. I've seen postcards. I've been to beaches. I've even stood in front of a stock photo booth at a West Van pharmacy. But nothing prepared me for the simulated majesty of this place. The turquoise water, the powder white sand, the palm trees swaying like they were unionized performers waiting for direction. Stan stood at the railing, staring at the beach as we approached in a tender boat. "Is that the real color of the water?" he asked. "Or are we just all having the same heat stroke?" Paul checked a chart on his phone. "It's the refracted light from ultrafine coral particles. Scientifically, yes, that's the color." "It's insulting," Stan said. "That's what it is." We landed with great enthusiasm and mild orthopedic risk. The tender boat gently ran aground, and we were left to step off directly into the shallows like mildly confused sea turtles. Ellen wore her wide-brim hat that made her look like a glamorous archaeologist. Denise had already lathered herself in 3 competing sunscreens and was shiny enough to qualify as a lighthouse. I was wearing flip-flops, which is a deeply unstable footwear for anyone with knees older than 50. 1 rogue tide shift, and I was walking like an injured pelican. Bobby and Ellen found a shady cabana and promptly stopped moving, melting into long reclining chairs with identical size that could only be described as spiritually content. "I think I've entered ambient mode," Bobby whispered. Denise wandered off for a massage from a woman named Graciela, who immediately started using what appeared to be full elbow pressure and divine judgment. "I feel like I'm being tenderized," Denise reported afterward. "It's magnificent." Paul and Bruce went off to find a kayak. I never saw the kayak, but they returned later with matching sunburns and a 2-liter bottle of mango soda. Stan signed up for parasailing, mostly to prove that he could. "You're afraid of high ceilings," Bobby reminded him. "This is sky." Totally different. He returned 45 minutes later with a GoPro full of vertical screaming and a souvenir tank top that read, "High on life and other terrifying things." I, George Lancaster, attempted to relax. I lay on a towel. I adjusted my hat. I applied sunscreen, then reapplied it when Ellen said I had missed entire quadrants. I tried reading, I tried sipping coconut water, and then, as often happens in my life, I found myself wandering alone toward a dune, not really sure why, just pulled by some vague force that said, "Go stand somewhere improbable and think things you're not qualified to think." Atop the dune, I looked out over the postcard world, families waiting in gentle surf, locals slicing fruit with artful flicks, tourists posing mid-jump with peace signs, and I felt, not jealous exactly, but confused. How do you do leisure? How do you unclench your soul? How does anyone ever just sit, exposed and idle, in the open palm of perfection without immediately questioning the texture of the sand or whether the coconut water is too warm? The wind picked up. I sat down, dug my feet into the hot sand, and closed my eyes. It didn't answer me, but it didn't need to. Later, Ellen joined me on the dune. "You okay?" she asked. "I think I'm having a quiet epiphany. Do you want to talk about it?" "No," I said. "It would ruin it." She nodded and sat down beside me. The sun began to lower itself over the sea, like someone dimming a chandelier. "God, this place is beautiful," I whispered. "It is," she said. "And you don't have custard on you." "Personal growth," I said. "Exactly." Hong Kong is vertical madness wrapped in neon elegance. From the moment we stepped off the ship and were swallowed by tunnels of steel, glass, and endlessly murmuring traffic, I could feel my internal compass wince. "It's not a city," I said to Ellen. "It's a machine." "Then don't fight it," she said. "Just ride it." So I did, literally. We started with the Central Mid-Levels escalator, a 2,600-foot conveyor of soft urban madness that lifts pedestrians through the mountainside neighborhoods like sushi on a conveyor belt. It's the longest outdoor escalator in the world, Paul announced, as if defending its honor. I can walk, Stan muttered, moments before tripping over a rogue handbag dog. The escalator was absurd, a scenic, mildly chaotic lift through cafes, antique shops, laundry lines, and more people than I could count who seemed to exist solely to smoke very aesthetically. Somewhere near Kane Road, we disembarked for egg tarts. I did not know a pastry could reorder my values. It was small, warm, buttery. It came from a tinier-than-legal bakery beneath a neon sign that flickered in Cantonese like a sarcastic fortune cookie. I took one bite and had to sit down on a marble bench just to process the implications. "Are you okay?" Denise asked. "No," I whispered. "This pastry has destroyed me." "Want another?" "I'm not ready." Ellen, watching me like someone evaluating a rare bird, bought 6 more. Paul tried to lead us on a walking tour of colonial landmarks, but the GPS on his phone disagreed with the reality of streets that curled like spaghetti across the hills. "This isn't Lan Kwai Fong," he insisted, staring into the map. "You're standing in front of a dumpling shop," Bruce pointed out. "A dumpling shop named Lan Kwai Fong," Denise added. Paul refused to accept this and eventually wandered off to argue with a street sign. We let him go. It was best that way. Ellen and I wandered uphill past a laneway where someone was playing an erhu, the notes stretching across the air like a silk thread tugged through smoke. We didn't speak. Eventually, she turned to me. "Do you ever feel like the world is getting taller?" "Yes," I said, "and faster." "And you?" "Slower, flatter." She smiled and pulled me up a flight of stairs into a tiny overlook garden. 3 benches, a mural of koi fish, and a view of the skyline that made me feel deliciously irrelevant, which I realized was something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. That night, the city glittered behind us as the ship pulled away, skyscrapers blinking their goodbyes in code we could never translate. I stood with Ellen, one hand in hers, the other holding the last remaining egg tart. "I'm saving this," I said. "For what?" "For a moment when I forget how big the world is." "Should I slap it out of your hand if you forget?" "Please do." Halong Bay doesn't reveal itself so much as emerge. The ship pulled in through a sheet of morning fog, and suddenly the limestone islands began appearing like stone whales surfacing mid-thought, one after another, until we were surrounded by gray-green pillars rising out of still water like the ruins of a half-forgotten god's dining set. Stan stared at the horizon, chewing a granola bar. "This feels like a place where I should have to fight a dragon or make a solemn vow." "You could start by wearing real shoes," Bobby said. "I'm breaking these sandals in. They're broken already." We boarded a junk boat, a beautiful, battered, red-sailed wooden vessel that rocked just enough to make me wonder if I'd made peace with my digestive system. Our local guide, Bao, welcomed us with the air of a man who had seen many cruise people before and expected little from them. "Today we explore caves," he said, "and the places where time sits quietly." Stan perked up. "Will there be hats?" "No," Bao said, "but we have fruit." The boat glided between towering karsts, silent except for the low cough of the engine and the occasional splash of something unseen. Ellen leaned over the side, fingers trailing in the jade-green water. "I can't tell if this place is real," she whispered. "It's real," I said. "It just doesn't care if we think so." At the Thien Kung Cave, we followed Bao into a cool, dripping cathedral of stone. Inside, the ceilings were ribbed with ancient flowstone and studded with stalactites that looked like frozen chandeliers. Carol and Ellen paused by a wall where fossil imprints clustered in patterns like braille. "They're snails," Carol murmured, brushing her fingers across the stone. "They're stories," Ellen replied. They lingered. Everyone else moved on. Denise took a flash photo and nearly fell backwards into a column. Stan tried to pretend it was an interpretive dance. Back on the boat, Bao laid out lunch. Grilled squid, sticky rice, small spring rolls wrapped in banana leaves. Bobby stared at the squid. "It's judging me." "It's grilled," I said. "It has no moral standing." She tried a piece, paused, then looked up. "It's chewy," she said, "but I respect it." Stan, having eaten his portion in 30 seconds, stood dramatically at the front of the boat, shirtless, wearing Bao's spare conical hat and holding a half-peeled lychee like a royal orb. "I am your emperor now," he declared, "ruler of the sea rocks, bringer of mild heartburn." "You're going to get a sun rash," Bobby called. "Then let it be a regal rash." Bao said nothing, but silently passed me more tea with the practiced blankness of a man who'd seen much and judged none of it worth remembering. The fog returned as we drifted back to the pier. Ellen rested her head on my shoulder. Carol handed out ginger chews. The bay faded around us, islands turning to silhouettes, then shadows, then suggestions. I looked down at the floor of the boat, still damp from our steps. "I think we just sailed through someone's memory," I said. "Whose?" Bruce asked. "Does it matter?" I said. No one answered. Da Nang arrived with fog and stillness, as if the city wasn't entirely sure we'd come and didn't want to make a fuss. The ship eased into port early, and from the balcony of our cabin I could just make out the sweep of China Beach, pale and flat beneath a sky that couldn't quite decide on a color. "It feels like the world is holding its breath," I said. Ellen sipped her tea and nodded. "Or it's just too early for traffic." We went ashore without a plan, which was fine. Da Nang doesn't really ask you to conquer it. It just lays itself out, street by street, curve by curve, and lets you wander through its contradictions. Motorbikes buzzed past barefoot monks, tourist cafes shared walls with ancient gates, signs in English, Vietnamese, French, the faint smell of lemongrass, then fish sauce, then exhaust, then sea air. I followed my nose until I found myself standing at the edge of an old American bunker, low and cracked, now barely distinguishable from the dunes around it. There was a placard, illegible, some dried incense sticks, and silence. Ellen stayed back. I walked up and placed a hand on the warm concrete. Not reverently, not symbolically, just wondering if anything stays. Later, we climbed partway up Marble Mountain, a jagged rise of caves, pagodas, and thick ancient greenery. The path was slick with mist. "Do people live here?" Stan asked, panting behind us. "Only the spiritual kind," Bruce said. "Do they have snacks?" Bobby swatted him with a folding fan she'd bought in Halong Bay and had named Disappointment. Halfway up, Ellen got distracted by a stall selling sandalwood incense and tiny hand-carved turtles. She bought 3. One for the niece she tolerates, one for herself, and one, she said, for future unknown purposes. At the summit, we paused to look north, and there, across the haze, rising above the jungle and surf, like a mirage or a billboard from the gods, stood the Lady Buddha of Da Nang, 70 meters tall, perfectly still, perfectly pale, perfectly present. We didn't speak, even Stan. Even Carol, just wind, and that strange, indescribable feeling you get when the world suddenly decides to let you feel small, safely. Down on the beach, I walked alone. The sand squeaked under my sandals. The water rolled in with a rhythm that made my chest loosen. I sat near an old fisherman mending a net. We didn't talk. He didn't look at me. I didn't take a photo. It was enough to coexist briefly. Back at a cafe near the pier, Stan tried to order a fresh coconut and was somehow served a seafood platter delivered in a flaming clamshell. He accepted it with regal dignity. "I shall dine like Neptune," he said. "It smells like Neptune," Bobby replied. We left Da Nang with sandalwood in our bags and salt in our shoes. I looked back one last time as the ship pulled away. The Lady Buddha was still there, watching, waiting, or maybe just being. Bangkok is not a city, it is a pressure system. We stepped off the air-conditioned shuttle and were hit by heat so dense I checked my pockets to make sure it wasn't trying to steal my wallet. The city shimmered. Not metaphorically, but literally, as though the air had turned to water with a bad attitude. Horns blared, incense smoke curled. A man passed on a motorcycle carrying a full-size refrigerator and 2 children who looked completely unbothered. "I smell fried something," Stan said. "I smell rules," I said. We had signed up for a temple and canal tour, which began with a long-tail boat through the Chao Phraya River, the brown, sloshing artery that splits Bangkok into whatever kind of logic it loosely abides by. The boat skipped along past golden rooftops, roosters, satellite dishes, and women selling iced drinks from their porches. Bruce narrated from a pamphlet. Paul adjusted his sun hat for optimal shadow angles. I sat quietly, sweating internally, and trying to remember whether I'd packed my backup pair of socks or my travel-sized anti-anxiety balm. At Wat Pho, home of the reclining Buddha, we were told we must remove our shoes and that men must cover their knees. I, George Lancaster, had made the tactical error of wearing travel capris. They were in fact zip-off pants I had aggressively zipped off. "You must wear pants," said the gatekeeper, with a tone suggesting this was not negotiable and possibly spiritual. "I have a scarf," I offered pathetically. "That is not a pant." Ellen, trying not to laugh audibly, handed me her tote bag and said, "I'll find you some trousers." While the rest of the group glided into the temple, I was left on a shaded bench beside a rooster, clutching a tote bag filled with sunscreen, travel wipes, and possibly a single intact banana from Da Nang. 10 minutes later, Ellen returned holding a plastic shopping bag and a dangerous smile. "They were on sale," she said. The pants were plaid, drawstring, and technically pajamas. I put them on over my capris, zipped the zips back on, and shuffled in. The reclining Buddha was worth it. 46 meters of gold leaf serenity, stretched out in mid-smirk, like it had figured out life a long time ago, and was politely waiting for us to catch up. Bobby and Carol disappeared into the attached gift shop and were briefly feared lost. They emerged 20 minutes later with sandal charms and what Carol described as a deeply symbolic bookmark that may or may not be a coaster. Outside, Ellen bartered with a tuk-tuk driver like a woman who had once negotiated late fees at 3 separate Vancouver libraries in one afternoon. 300 baht for the palace and back, she said. 400 and I give you secret tiger shop, the driver replied. No tiger, no silk, no gem. You are a very strong lady. I know, Ellen said, climbing in. Back at the ship, as we peeled off our layers and tried to remember what being dry felt like, Denise announced she had eaten mango sticky rice at 5 different locations. I feel one with the fruit, she whispered, lying prone on a deck chair. Stan looked down at his street-bought trousers. These have a certain mobility to them. You look like a retired circus juggler, Bruce said. Style is a mindset, Stan replied. That evening, I stood on our balcony, pantsless once more, sipping a cold drink and watching Bangkok blur behind us, spires and neon, smoke and satellites, receding into the thick gold of a tropical dusk. Would you go back? Ellen asked beside me. Only in armor. I'll pack extra pants next time. We clinked glasses, and somewhere inside me, I think even the reclining Buddha might have nodded. Koh Samui smelled like warm jasmine, grilled meat, and sunscreen panic. We landed on the tender boat just after noon, the sun already offended by our presence and determined to let us know. Stan immediately purchased a floral sarong and wore it as a cape. Bobby applied SPF 50 with the intensity of a medieval alchemist. Denise spotted a food stall called Mango Heaven and nearly began speaking in tongues. Our first stop was the Big Buddha, a towering gold statue sitting lotus-style atop a wide stairway flanked by dragon railings. From a distance, it looked serene and wise. Up close, it looked hot. It's radiating inner peace, Ellen whispered. It's radiating heat stroke, I replied, mopping my forehead. We ascended barefoot as required, and at the top we met a monk who handed us a small string bracelet and asked Ellen where she was from. Vancouver, she said. He grinned. Ah, snow people. He then asked me where I was from. Vancouver as well, I said. He looked me over. You seem more indoors, he said. I have never felt so seen. Back at sea level, I attempted to crack open a coconut at a roadside stand. The vendor assured me it was easy. He handed me a wooden mallet and smiled. 15 seconds later, the coconut exploded with a wet pop and sprayed its contents into my left ear canal, half my shirt, and possibly a local gecko. The vendor laughed so hard he leaned on a crate of bananas for support. I have become the coconut, I told Ellen, defeated. She handed me a napkin and said, This is your beach baptism. That night we attended a lantern festival on the sand. Locals and tourists stood side by side, lighting paper lanterns that lifted slowly into the night like glowing thoughts. It was absurdly beautiful. Dozens of orange lights rising into the inky blue, floating gently toward the stars. Stan tried to launch his early and got caught in someone's hair. He apologized and declared that he had been intercepted by fate. Bobby helped a small child relight hers with the focus of a bomb technician. Carol took slow, deliberate photos. Denise stood silently, eyes wet, not smiling. I lit mine, waited for the flame to steady, and let it go. It rose quickly, then gently, then drifted up, alone at first, then joining the current of light above. I watched it until it disappeared. Then I realized my hand was still raised, empty, and I felt okay with that. If Boracay was a postcard and Koh Samui was a mood board, then Sihanoukville was an unfinished sentence. We stepped ashore and were immediately greeted by 1. A sign that said, "Welcome to Casino Bay." 2. A man selling shrimp from the back of a tuk-tuk. 3. A woman with a megaphone warning us about unofficial Wi-Fi. It was, in short, a very specific vibe. "Is this the wrong dock?" Paul asked. "No," Bruce said, scanning a guidebook. "This is exactly right." We took tuk-tuks into town, a noisy, bumpy caravan of retirees clutching sun hats and trying not to inhale too much diesel exhaust. Every building looked like it had been built 3 months ago or 30 years ago, and no one could agree which. There were neon casino signs in Chinese, cafes advertising both Western breakfasts and emergency SIM cards, and a shop that seemed to sell nothing but knockoff Crocs and karaoke microphones. Denise whispered, "It's like someone built a city while drunk and didn't check their spelling." I loved it immediately. We reached the beachfront around noon. The water was pale, the sand surprisingly coarse, and the shrimp, served grilled, skewered, and lightly charred by a woman named Dara under a parasol made of palm fronds, was, in a word, sublime. Ellen took one bite and closed her eyes. "I'd forgive a warlord for this shrimp," she said. "I'm putting that on a pillow," I replied. Further down the beach, Stan had discovered a bar with hammocks, not near the bar. In the bar. He ordered a mango daiquiri, which arrived in a hollowed-out coconut adorned with an entire orchid and a cocktail umbrella that refused to stay upright. "This is the life," he declared, and flopped into the hammock with the confidence of a man who had never tested tensile fabric before. The hammock immediately failed. It didn't break per se, more like gently inverted, dumping him slowly but firmly onto the sand like an amused parent flipping over a toddler for fun. A German couple clapped. Bobby gave him a hand and muttered, "Maybe stick to chairs." Meanwhile, Ellen and I had wandered up a side street, following the faint sound of chimes. We found a tiny temple tucked between a laundromat and a scooter rental office. It was cool inside, quiet, full of bells and red lanterns, and smelled of smoke and wet stone. No one else was there. We sat for 5 minutes, just listening. To the bells, to ourselves, and then we left. That was enough. Back on the ship, over drinks, Carol tried to explain the casino economy of Cambodia. Paul was still fixated on shrimp logistics, and Stan kept tugging at his elbow like it had absorbed sand trauma. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I'm emotionally bruised," he said, "and I think this daiquiri was mostly rum and regret." "You're still holding it." "Of course I am." As we pulled away, the city flickered behind us, unfinished, alive, confused. Like it was still deciding what kind of place it wanted to be. And I realized, same. Kuala Lumpur feels like someone turned a food court into a religion, then gave it a transportation system that only answers in riddles. We arrived mid-morning, heat shimmering off every surface, like the entire city had been lightly flambéed. Ellen wore her breathable linen blouse that always made her look composed. I wore a shirt that was actively losing the will to live. "Humidity at 93%, Bruce reported. "My will to live at 17%, Stan replied. We started with a monorail ride because apparently that's a thing you must do in Kuala Lumpur. The station was there. I wouldn't call it organized so much as cooperative in spirit. The train arrived with a screech, opened its doors like an afterthought, and whooshed us off through a jungle of concrete, glass, and satellite dishes. Ellen and I meant to get off at Bukit Bintang. We did not. We got off at the next stop, then the wrong platform back, then somehow ended up at a station called Hang Tuah, which I still suspect is a metaphor. This city is an M.C. Escher drawing with dumplings, I said. We're not lost, Ellen said calmly. We're discovering. Eventually, we made our way to the Central Market, a 2-story carnival of color, incense, counterfeit handbags, batik scarves, and 5 million tiny plastic frogs that croaked when you tilted them. Carol was bartering for a carved pen that looked like a dagger. Paul had found a durian tasting booth and was deeply regretting it. Stan arrived carrying a clear plastic bag with something inside that looked like a corn cob dipped in Red Bull. It's energy corn, he said. The vendor said it's like life insurance for your knees. Bobby, without looking up from a rack of elephant print trousers, said, "That man was trying to get rid of you." Then it rained. Instantly, completely. A full tropical downpour, turning the market into a festival of umbrellas and squeals. Ellen and I ducked into a nearby covered pavilion, where entirely by accident, we ended up seated in the back row of what turned out to be a public health seminar about sugar addiction. The speaker was very passionate. There were slides. There was a small cup of soy tea handed to each attendee. I drank it. It was confusing. Ellen took notes. "This is fascinating," she whispered. "Did you know Malaysians consume more sugar than anywhere in Asia?" "I'm about 90% sugar right now," I said, and then we just sat there. Let the rain fall, let the speaker speak. Let the soy tea be soy tea. It was nice. Back at the port, soaked, hungry, and slightly more educated about blood glucose than we'd planned, I bought a Kopi AIs, Malaysian iced coffee that tasted like regret, rocket fuel, and possibly salvation. Ellen sipped hers and smiled. "You seem lighter," she said. "I think I just needed to not do anything." Is that what we did today? No, but it's what it felt like. That night, from the top deck of the ship, I could see the Petronas towers blinking in the distance like twin ideas we never finished building. And I thought, maybe that's what cities are for, to remind you you're small and then give you coffee about it. Singapore felt like the future had finally learned manners. The air smelled like orchids, the streets were impossibly clean, and everything worked, which frankly unnerved me. "I don't trust a city where the pigeons walk single file," I muttered. "Maybe they've just evolved," Ellen said. "Like the rest of this place." We disembarked onto a port that looked like it had been designed by someone with access to very expensive blueprints and absolutely no tolerance for clutter. Even the taxi line had flowers. Our first stop was the Singapore Botanic Gardens, a sprawling expanse of lush paths, koi ponds, and foliage so vibrant it looked photoshopped in real time. "Everything is labeled," Bruce said reverently. "I feel like I'm walking through an interactive screensaver," Bobby whispered. At the National Orchid Garden, we were surrounded by hybrids named after celebrities, heads of state, and several people none of us had ever heard of, but now respected purely by plant proxy. Ellen met a local woman named Joyce who wore a sun hat, khaki cargo dress, and had passionate opinions about pollination strategies. "She's a retired chemistry teacher," Ellen told me later. "She invited me to her orchid club." "Did you accept?" I said I'd think about it. Stan tried to chew gum discreetly. A passing schoolchild tapped him on the arm and said very politely, "Sir, you're not supposed to have that." Stan froze. "Do they have cameras?" "They are the cameras," I whispered. He swallowed it whole and changed the subject to sushi. Lunch was in a hawker center that looked like a food court designed by NASA. Stainless steel, polite signage, numbered stalls, and curry puffs that made me rethink my prior life choices. Denise, full of coconut rice and vindication, declared, "This is what cities should be." "I feel very supervised," I said. "You should be supervised," Bobby added. The pivotal moment of the day came unexpectedly. We had wandered into a small public restroom in the middle of a mall near Orchard Road. It smelled like jasmine. The floors were spotless. The stalls were silent and serene. There was art on the walls. We emerged different. That was spiritual, Carol said. Ellen was quiet for a long moment. Then, I've been to weddings less thoughtfully arranged. I nodded. I might be ready to make better decisions. That evening, we strolled the gardens by the bay, where glowing tree sculptures lit up the night in a programmed light show choreographed to Debussy. Stan cried. He said it was the lights. I think it was the residual gum guilt. We stood under a glowing canopy, soft music in our ears, the city purring around us like a cat made of spreadsheets and circuit boards. And I realized, sometimes order isn't control. Sometimes it's care. Jakarta does not introduce itself. It collides with you. We arrived into a tangle of gray and green, the skyline barely visible through a permanent soup of heat haze and preemptive exhaust. By 9 a.m., I was already sweating into my socks. By 9:30, I had given up on socks entirely. The air is chewy, Stan observed, blinking at the sky. It's 87% water and 13% scooter fumes, Bruce confirmed, consulting an app called Mildly Alarming Weather. We disembarked with a local walking map in hand, a cheerful, color-coded guide provided by the port authorities that suggested a lovely loop through historic Dutch buildings, a park, and a market street. What it did not mention was that several of those streets had since been converted into drainage canals, open-air renovation projects, or unexpected soup vendors. I think we're standing inside what used to be a traffic circle, Ellen said, looking around at a roundabout now occupied by 4 mopeds, 3 durian stalls, and a cow. According to the map, I said, turning it upside down, we're in a museum courtyard. We are standing next to a man selling flip-flops out of a filing cabinet. Could still be a museum. Rain arrived at 11:07, sideways. Within 45 seconds, I was soaked to the moral level. We ducked under an awning with a group of locals who looked like this happened 3 times a day. It does. One of them, an elderly woman in a plastic poncho that might once have been a grocery bag, handed us fried tempeh wrapped in banana leaf. Denise took a bite and whispered, "I will never be the same." Then, "I think this has cinnamon in it." Then, "I need to sit down and rethink tofu." Stan, meanwhile, had wandered off to find a bottle of water and returned 20 minutes later with a partial haircut. "What happened?" Ellen asked, blinking. "There was a barber." I sat down. "I think we bonded. He started clipping and I panicked halfway through, so now I look like a weather pattern." He wasn't wrong. It was like watching a cloud learn regret. Bobby found a fruit cart run by a man who spoke exactly 4 words of English. Pineapple, fresh. No joke. She bought 3. She later described it as the kind of pineapple that makes you question every other pineapple you've ever known. Eventually, we made it to a cafe that definitely wasn't on the map, but served astonishing coffee, warm sambal noodles, and shelter from the now vertical rain. We dripped gently into wicker chairs. We stared out at the street, where the floodwater glistened with a sheen of city. "This isn't what I pictured," I said. "What did you picture?" Ellen asked. "Something more navigable." She sipped her coffee. "Isn't that what we always picture? Before we get where we're going?" Later, back on the ship, I peeled off my second set of damp clothes and stood barefoot on our balcony. The Jakarta skyline shimmered in the stormlight, imperfect and alive. I wasn't sure what streets we'd been on, or if they'd be there tomorrow. But we'd found something anyway. Maybe maps are just suggestions. Maybe presence is the only true path. The approach to Semarang was all green hills, curling roads and mist that made the horizon look like it hadn't finished loading yet. We boarded a bus for the 2.5-hour inland trip to Borobudur, the largest Buddhist temple in the world, a 9th century stone monument built like a sacred wedding cake and covered in 20 centuries of wisdom and erosion. Stan spent the first hour of the trip trying to peel a mango with a travel spork. Bobby confiscated it after he almost lost a knuckle. We arrived mid-morning, the air already thick with rain-warmed foliage, incense, and the sound of distant bells. "Do you hear that?" Ellen asked, stepping off the bus. "It's the sound of enlightenment," Denise said. "It's the sound of me sweating from my shins," I replied. The walk up to the temple was steep, winding, and flanked by stone stupas, bell-shaped structures that held old relics and occasional echoes of time itself. We climbed in slow spirals, pausing to read carvings, admire views, and let our knees catch up to our ambitions. At the top, surrounded by quiet domes and cloud-soft light, I felt lighter. Not spiritual exactly, just not hurried. And then a monkey stole my packaged peanuts. Let me be clear, I did not give the monkey my snack. I placed it briefly on a stone ledge to wipe sweat off my face. The monkey appeared from a bush with the precision of a stage cue, snatched the peanuts, made direct eye contact with what I can only describe as moral authority, and then sprinted off in a blur of fur and smugness. Stan witnessed the whole thing and said, "This is why I don't trust nature." Ellen, unbothered, was photographing a stupa with a shaft of light beaming through it like a scene from a film no one had the budget to make. "It's amazing," she said softly. "What is?" "That they built this with no machines. Just faith and math." I nodded, still emotionally wounded by the monkey. In the market at the base of the hill, Denise bought a hand-carved mortar and pestle the size of a curling stone. She carried it for 20 minutes before realizing it weighed more than her luggage allowance. Stan was approached by a vendor selling magic Java spice kits that supposedly contained ancient blends for strength, clarity, and digestion. He asked, "What happens if I combine them all?" The vendor replied, "You become very interesting." Stan bought two. Back on the bus, I stared out the window as the jungle and village rooftops drifted past in blurs of green and red and rust. "I can't decide if this is the most spiritual or the silliest day I've had on this trip," I told Ellen. "Maybe it's both," she said. "Maybe you needed both." And maybe I did. A temple, a monkey, a stolen snack, a quiet moment on a stone older than most empires. Not bad as far as days go. Bali doesn't arrive with a shout. It exhales. The air in Ubud was soft, warm, and full of jasmine, gamelan bells, and that very specific kind of calm that suggests everyone else has figured out something you haven't. We checked into a small guest house on a hill above the rice fields. Roosters echoed, incense floated, frogs issued statements from drainage channels. Bruce looked around and said, "This place feels aware." Our first walk into town took 40 minutes to go half a mile, partly because the sidewalks were a puzzle, and partly because Ellen stopped every 30 seconds to admire the offering trays. They were everywhere, on stoops, shop fronts, walls, and scooter seats. Little palm leaf baskets filled with marigolds, rice, crackers, candy, and smoke, like daily love letters to the universe. "Who are they for?" I asked. "For gods, for ancestors, for spirits," she said. "Maybe just for balance." Stan tried to step around one and accidentally knocked a cracker loose. A passing vendor saw, replaced it, and said, "No problem. We always give again." That sentence followed me for the rest of the day. In the afternoon, Denise and I went to a traditional dance performance in a temple courtyard. It was beautiful, precise, hypnotic, and also 2 hours longer than expected. There was no clear narrative. Just shifting masks, syncopated drumming, and a woman in gold who stared into my soul for longer than I was emotionally prepared for. Denise leaned over an hour in and whispered, "Do we clap, or bow, or scream softly?" "I don't think we leave," I replied. "I think this continues until the moon comes out or one of us reaches enlightenment." Meanwhile, Bruce had decided to try the rooftop infinity pool. Unfortunately, the pool in question was both narrower than advertised and designed to resemble a koi fish, complete with painted scales and curving sides. He stepped in confidently, slipped on a submerged ridge, and was only rescued by a local teenager who'd been cleaning the deck and casually reached out one hand, like someone catching a cat that had fallen off a windowsill. Back at dinner, Bruce simply said, "I think I fought the koi and lost." We raised a glass in his honor. That evening, we sat in a rooftop cafe, the town below blinking with lanterns and scooters and dogs barking at shadows. "I think I like it here," Stan said, "even though nothing makes sense." "Maybe that's the point," Ellen said. And I thought, maybe peace isn't the absence of motion. Maybe it's learning to move inside the noise without needing to fix it. Komodo Island is the kind of place that feels like a dare from nature. Even the air was different, drier, hotter, full of warnings. The sky was a relentless blue, and the land looked like someone had tried to grow a cactus but got distracted and left the sun on too high. We met our park guides under a small shaded shack where the only rule was printed in 3 languages on a warped sign. Do not run, even if they charge, especially if they charge. Comforting, Bobby said. Stan looked around. Are there bathrooms on the trail? No, the guide said without blinking. Then I'm already afraid, he replied. The guides carried forked sticks, which was less comforting than intended. One of them used duct tape to repair his as we watched. Is that regulation? I asked. He smiled. It is regulation enough. We hiked in quiet, dry heat, watching for movement in the underbrush. The landscape looked like it hadn't changed in 1,000 years, and probably didn't plan to start now. I wondered if fear counts as cardio. We saw the first Komodo dragon near a waterhole. It was huge, maybe 8 feet long, with skin like volcanic leather, and a tongue that flicked the air like it was testing the mood. It moved slowly, then suddenly, not slowly. Denise asked, "How fast can they actually?" And the guide cut her off. Fast enough. Ellen didn't flinch. She just watched, like she had already made peace with the food chain. I clutched my water bottle like a talisman and tried to project not delicious. Stan, being Stan, tried to name one of them. I think he looks like a Reggie. The guide said, "We do not name them." Not even ironically? No. Stan nodded solemnly. Fair. It's Reggie's world. We just hike in it. We came to a high lookout where the island spread out below us. Dry hills, broken cliffs, scrub trees, silence. The MV Grand Odyssey floated in the bay like a forgotten thought. I stood at the edge of the overlook, sweating, adrenalized, and suddenly very aware of my feet. Ellen stepped beside me. You all right? She asked. I'm aware of being very alive, I said. Isn't that what you wanted when we signed up? I thought I wanted shrimp buffets and towel art. She smiled. You wanted this. You just didn't know how to say it. That night, back on the ship, I took a shower and stood on the balcony watching the jungle fade into shadow. I didn't know if I felt brave, but I'd stood still when it mattered, and that felt close enough. Darwin greeted us with heat like a legal warning. It wasn't just hot, it was theoretical. The kind of heat that makes you reflect on all your choices, especially the ones involving sleeves. The port shimmered. The pavement pulsed. Even the air seemed to say, You sure you want to be here, mate? I smell cooked sidewalk, Stan said. I smell cooked me, Bobby replied, adjusting her sun hat like she was preparing for war. We took a shuttle to a crocodile sanctuary operated by a man named Troy, who had a scar that made you feel like he earned it. Salties can outrun a horse for 20 meters, he said cheerfully, standing in front of a chain-link fence that did not look federal grade. And after 20 meters, I asked? They're just mad you made them sweat. We watched as a monstrous saltwater crocodile the size of a rowboat snapped at a chunk of raw meat dangled from a stick. I flinched. Ellen did not. They look older than God, she murmured. They look hungry, I said, backing up instinctively. Don't worry, said Troy. They don't go for tourists anymore. Anymore? He just smiled. After that dose of reptilian therapy, we stopped at a cafe called Drip and Rumble, which offered cold brew, air conditioning, and what might have been the best banana bread I've had on 4 continents. Bob ordered a long black, stared out the window at nothing, and sighed with the gravity of a man who'd seen 1,000 birthdays and only just started asking questions. What's up? Bruce asked, stirring sugar into his flat white. Bob nodded toward a museum across the street. That tree fossil in there is 250 million years old. And I've spent 62 years trying to decide whether I like jazz. Naturally, we went into the museum, air-conditioned, quiet, filled with things that made you feel small in a comforting way. The fossil in question was indeed impressive. Bob stood in front of it for a long time, then softly, I think I do like jazz, but only the kind with vibraphone. We considered this a win. Meanwhile, Stan had purchased a vacuum-sealed packet of crocodile jerky, taken one bite, and declared it regretful in every possible texture. He passed it to Denise, who passed it to a garbage can that also looked disappointed. That night, back on the ship, I stood on deck with a gin and tonic melting in my hand and watched Australia retreat into a burning orange dusk. I had come expecting kangaroos and surfboards. I had not expected to feel so thoroughly outmatched. And yet, I kind of love it, I said. Ellen raised an eyebrow. I mean, I'd never live here, but I like that it exists, she nodded. Not everything has to be home. Some places are just there to remind you what it feels like to be the small thing. There's a very specific kind of silence on a sea day, not the absence of noise. There's always a hum from the engines, a slosh of water against hull, someone yelling bingo at regular intervals, but a suspension of purpose. Nowhere to go, nothing to do, just float. I woke up, pulled on the same shirt I'd worn 2 days ago, and declared it ship casual. Ellen raised no objections. Laundry was the first mistake of the morning. The ship's laundry room had 4 machines, 12 passengers trying to act casual, and 1 woman guarding the dryer with a look that could crater mountains. I tried to multitask, load my clothes, grab a coffee, return before the spin cycle ended. What I returned to was 1 pair of slightly damp pants folded by someone else, a missing sock, and my passport, which had been in my shorts pocket, now warm, slightly crinkled, and smelling faintly of lavender detergent. Ellen stared at it. You laundered your identity, she said. Is that not the dream? Later, I joined Ellen at a wildlife lecture in the Horizon Lounge. The topic was venomous sea creatures you may already be swimming with. I lasted 13 minutes. The lecturer was a cheerful woman named Petra, who showed a photo of a sea snake curled lovingly around a scuba diver's arm. They're shy and often affectionate, she said. I left quietly and went to stand somewhere landless. Meanwhile, Denise had assembled an elite trivia team composed of herself, Bobby, Bruce, and a retiree from Ohio named Sandy, who knew every Oscar winner since 1953. Stan and I attempted shuffleboard, which sounds relaxing but quickly devolved into Cold War strategy and subtle taunts. He claimed I nudged the puck too gently. I claimed he was weaponizing his sandals. Bruce wandered by and said, "You two are fighting over a sport invented to give bored aristocrats something to do between gout attacks." Stan responded by shuffling the puck so aggressively it slid off the board and into a waiter's foot. In the afternoon, we sat on deck and watched nothing go by. No land, no birds, just sea and sky, and the feeling that time had loosened its grip slightly. "Do you miss land yet?" Ellen asked. Strangely, no. She nodded. It's nice not being anywhere. It's like a breath. Stan appeared, holding a shipboard ice cream cone and wearing 2 visors. "I'm inventing a new sport," he said, "and we're ignoring that," I replied. That evening, there was a sunset so ridiculous it looked computer-generated, purple fading into scarlet, streaks of gold across an ocean that somehow went still just to reflect it better. We all stood there, leaning over the railing like people in a painting who forgot to pose. No one said anything for a long while. Not because we had nothing to say, but because for once it felt good not to fill the silence. Cairns was the first place in weeks that felt moist with intent. The air smelled of plumeria and seaweed, and everyone in the port wore either a wetsuit or the expression of someone about to be talked into one. "It's like landing inside a biology textbook," Ellen said. "I think my shoes just fogged up," I replied. The ship had arranged a full-day outing morning snorkel over the Great Barrier Reef, afternoon walk in the Daintree rainforest, a packed lunch that promised to be reef-friendly, which made me suspicious about what it was replacing. We boarded a catamaran named Liquid Possibility, where an unnervingly enthusiastic crew member named Bronte handed us our gear. "I got a wetsuit that smells like regret," Stan said. "Mine smells like someone tried to clean a wetsuit with a fruit smoothie," I added. Bronte clapped. "They all smell like that. It's part of the experience." The reef itself was blue-green magic. Once we were in the water, after I'd spent 7 full minutes psyching myself up to zip the suit, and then another 4 trying to unfog my mask using the natural method, spitting, which I failed at, I finally floated out and looked down. Fish like rainbows, coral like castles, silence like an old secret. I forgot my fins were on the wrong feet. I forgot about my fogged up passport. I forgot about everything, actually. It was that good. Ellen surfaced near me and said, "Did you see the parrotfish?" I saw a fish eat another fish and smile about it. That might have been Stan. Back on the boat, Stan had a sunburn in the exact shape of Queensland across his shoulder. He refused aloe and instead insisted it gave him territorial energy. Bronte gave us reef-safe sandwiches and taught Denise how to spot parrotfish poop. It looks like sand. Fun fact, a lot of tropical sand is fish poop. I'm going to need a different definition of paradise, Denise said, chewing slowly. In the afternoon, we hiked through the Daintree, which Ellen described as prehistoric and which I described as like walking through someone else's lungs. We were damp within minutes. Birds screamed like old typewriters. Vines tried to shake our hands, and everything was older than logic. At one point, Denise stopped, knelt beside a moss-covered rock, and just stared at it for a full minute. When she stood up again, she looked completely calm. I needed that, was all she said. Back on the bus, I wiped mist off the window and watched the jungle fade into sugarcane fields. Everything here is loud and quiet at the same time, I said to Ellen. She nodded. Like the reef and the rainforest, and probably us. That night, back on the ship, I peeled off my damp swim shirt, toweled off my dignity, and stepped barefoot onto our balcony. The sea smelled different now, more alive, less abstract. Maybe wonder isn't in the things you plan. Maybe it's just 30 feet from the boat. Townsville is one of those places that feels like it's trying very hard not to care if you notice it. We stepped off the ship into dry sun and clear sky, surrounded by buildings that looked like they were built by competent optimists in 1987 and never worried about it again. This is very Australia, Bobby said. How do you mean? I mean, I just passed a sign for coral research, a steakhouse, and a tattoo parlor run by a guy named Boof. We split up for the day. Ellen headed straight for the Reef HQ aquarium, which she'd circled 3 times in the shore excursion brochure. Stan wandered off muttering something about rodeo aesthetic and leather as lifestyle. Denise, as usual, went uphill, specifically Castle Hill, a giant pink granite rock that rises like a baked potato in the middle of the city. I decided it was time to confront something I'd been avoiding since day 3 of the cruise, a proper sun hat. The shop was called Headspace, which I assumed was a joke. Inside, it was all canvas brims, leather bands, cork dangles, and the deep scent of dust, sweat, and lived experience. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair, a wide-brimmed hat of her own, and a look that suggested she'd survived 2 cyclones and at least 1 divorce with dignity intact. "You look like a man who doesn't know what kind of hat he needs," she said. "That's because I don't. Sit." And I did. Her name was Mel. She asked where I was from. I said Vancouver. She nodded like she'd guessed. "Too pale. You squint. Your hat's too polite." Is that a diagnosis or a haiku? Bit of both. We tried 6 hats. The 7th one fit like it had been waiting for me. I stared in the mirror. I didn't look like someone on vacation anymore. I looked like someone capable of things. I told her I'd take it. She said, "Good, but don't wear it like it's borrowed." Later, I found Ellen in the coral tunnel at Reef HQ, surrounded by swaying anemones and backlit jellyfish. "I could live in here," she whispered. I nodded. It really did feel like time had been asked to wait politely at the door. Back on board, Denise had sore calves. Stan smelled like barbecue and questionable choices, and Ellen showed off a postcard with a handwritten quote on the back from a marine biologist named Fiona. It said, "Corals build islands and outlast empires, but they're dying to live." We sat on deck and watched Castle Hill fade into the golden dusk. I touched the brim of my new hat and thought, I don't know who I am on this trip, but I like who I am when I don't know. Airlie Beach looked like someone took a backpacker's dream and filtered it through a blender of sunscreen, sugarcane, and mild chaos. We stepped off the shuttle and were immediately met by 6 tour operators, each named something like Kai or Bree or Lizard, all wearing mirrored sunglasses and branded tank tops. We chose the one named Jay, mostly because his boat had the fewest visible duct tape repairs and because he said, "Don't worry, mate. I've only beached this thing twice this year." The boat was named Liquid Reasoning, which was deeply misleading. Jay gave us the safety briefing entirely from memory and while eating a mango. If anything goes wrong, he said, stay calm, breathe deep, and remember that jellyfish are more afraid of you than you are of them, except for the ones that aren't. Ellen raised a hand. Are we passing through any stinger zones? Jay grinned. That's what the suits are for, or as I call them, jelly-proof pajamas. We motored out into the Whitsundays, turquoise water, soft white beaches, and islands like someone spilled marbles into the sea. It was staggeringly beautiful, and Jay, to his credit, knew all the best coves, and absolutely none of the science. That's coral, he said, pointing. Basically underwater broccoli, but sharper. Ellen quietly corrected him under her breath. Denise looked green. I shouldn't have had 2 hash browns, she said. Or maybe I should have had 3. The snorkeling was lovely until a current shifted, and Denise floated directly over what may or may not have been a stingray. She made a sound not unlike a kettle boiling under duress. Don't panic, Jay yelled from the boat. Unless it moves. Then panic a little. Stan stayed on board, peeling a mango with military focus. This, he said reverently, holding up a dripping slice, is my true fruit. You said that about durian, Bobby replied. I was lying then. This is real. Eventually, Jay dropped anchor in a quiet cove with glass-clear water, no one else around, and a horizon that looked like it hadn't changed since the concept of sky was invented. We floated in silence for a while. I drifted away from the group, arms stretched wide, and stared up at the pale blue dome above me. And for the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet. No plans, no comparisons, just the sound of water against my ears and the knowledge that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That night, back on the ship, we watched the Whitsundays disappear into twilight. Jay waved from the dock as we pulled away, probably forgetting half of us existed. I liked him, Ellen said. He'll be arrested someday, Denise replied. Maybe, I said, but until then, he gives one hell of a float. Brisbane was the first city in days that didn't seem either vaguely cursed or secretly smoking. It was, as Ellen put it, just nice. There were trees lining the sidewalks, trains that arrived on time, cafes that knew how to spell macchiato without irony. I feel emotionally moisturized, Denise said, sipping a coffee from a cup made of recycled sugar cane. Is that a thing? I asked. It is now. Our main event of the day was a trip to the Lone Pine Koala Sanctuary, an hour outside the city, where you could meet Australia's iconic marsupials without needing to hike through eucalyptus forests or carry anti-snake spray. I've waited my whole life for this, Bobby whispered as we boarded the shuttle. I thought you waited your whole life for Tokyo Disneyland, Ellen said. That too, but this has koalas. Lone Pine was everything promised. Sun-dappled, calm, full of small creatures who either wanted to nap or stare at you like you owed them a favor. We saw koalas, mostly motionless, one of which sneezed and made Stan shriek. Wallabies, who let you feed them and then judged you afterward. A kangaroo so muscular it looked like it had a gym membership and bad opinions. And then there was the wombat. He was curled into a shallow dirt patch, like a dropped bread roll. His name was Gary. He didn't move. I found myself deeply attached. I think he's my mentor now, I said. Ellen agreed. At the gift shop, Denise insisted we all buy matching gray fleece koala ear hats. I refuse, I said. You wore a poncho in Sihanoukville, she replied. I was tricked. You looked joyful. I caved. We took a group photo by the sanctuary sign, all of us in our fuzzy hats. Ellen holding a map, Stan mid-bite of a questionable ice cream bar, Gary the wombat somewhere nearby, probably dreaming about quiet revenge. Later, we strolled along the south bank where the river sparkled and a man played jazz guitar under a jacaranda tree. Everything smelled like baked stone and sunscreen and lunchtime optimism. I could live here, Denise said. You say that about every city, Bruce pointed out. I mean it this time. That night, back on board, I stood at our balcony rail and adjusted my new hat. Yes, the koala hat, and thought about dignity. I'd feared this trip would chip it away, but maybe I'd misunderstood dignity entirely. Maybe it wasn't about being seen a certain way. Maybe it was about not caring how you were seen and showing up anyway, even in ears, especially in ears. Sydney felt like walking into a postcard you accidentally believed in. The ship docked in Circular Quay, and there it was, the Opera House gleaming like a napkin folded by gods, the harbor bridge stoic and steel-backed, and beneath it all, a city that somehow managed to be both casual and cinematic. Feels fake, Stan said, squinting at the skyline. I think it just feels finished, Ellen replied. We split off again, one of those gentle, companionable group fissures where everyone agrees to meet up later. No plans, no pressure. Ellen and I wandered along the quay, then ducked into a hole-in-the-wall cafe where a barista with a beard like a storybook wizard handed me a flat white so smooth I forgot every complaint I'd ever had about milk. You know it's good when you get emotional after the first sip, I said. You cried at an airport Cinnabon once, Ellen reminded me. That was different. That was survival. We walked through the Royal Botanic Garden, which felt like someone had very carefully curated serenity and given it excellent signage. Under a fig tree, we sat in the shade and watched ibis birds menace tourists for sandwich scraps. You realize we're halfway, I said. Ellen nodded. I do. Feels weird. It does. I'm not ready for it to end. We're not near the end. We're just in the knowing part. Meanwhile, Stan had apparently climbed halfway up the harbor bridge, then texted us a photo of his shoe next to a metal beam and a caption that read, "This is what confidence looks like." Bobby replied with, "That's a steel rivet, Stan." And Denise, we later learned, had gone to the Museum of Contemporary Art, stood in front of a giant canvas covered entirely in red handprints, and started to cry. When we met up later, she blamed seasonal pollen. No one pressed the matter. That evening, the sky turned orange and lilac and then slowly, confidently into night. We sat at a rooftop bar with a view of the Opera House, the bridge, the water, all of it lit up like the universe was in a good mood. I think I expected this trip to make me feel smaller, I said. Ellen sipped her wine. And it hasn't? It has. But in a good way, like I finally accepted I don't have to know everything or control it. I just have to be in it. She smiled. That's probably what you were supposed to learn. I looked out at the skyline, lights reflected in water, people laughing below, ships coming and going. Still don't love jazz, though, I said. She nodded. Fair enough. Wellington, as it turns out, does not care if you like it. It greets you with wind strong enough to rearrange your opinions, a sky that can't make up its mind, and locals who've adapted by wearing wool with an air of defiance. I feel like I'm being exfoliated by air, Denise muttered as we stepped off the ship. Somewhere, a kite just exploded, I added, clutching my hat like it owed me money. Stan's scarf came loose immediately and began a new life heading north. We ducked into a cafe called Bitter and Ground, mostly for shelter, but also because it smelled like burnt sugar and smugness. The barista was a man with a mustache of mathematical precision who asked me how I liked my coffee, then stared at me like he didn't believe the answer. Flat white, I said. He nodded. Whole milk? Yes? He nodded again, slowly, knowingly, as if he were about to tell my coffee secrets to someone in back. When it arrived, it was perfect, creamy, hot, textured like silk on purpose. And yet, it judged me from the first sip, like it knew I didn't understand New Zealand rugby, or how to pronounce Maori place names properly, or that my shoes weren't waterproof. This coffee knows too much, I whispered. Ellen nodded, eyes closed. I think mine just told me to call my sister. We wandered through Cuba Street, where every shop sells either ethically sourced alpaca yarn or tactical outerwear, often in the same building. Stan tried on a beanie that made him look like a forest mushroom trying to enter grad school. Bobby bought a scarf that may have been hand-woven by someone with a grant. Ellen vanished into a bookstore and didn't reappear for 45 minutes. We eventually found her in the poetry section, smiling faintly, a stack of slim volumes in her arms. I forgot how nice it is to feel surrounded by sentences, she said. Denise insisted we visit Tupapa, the National Museum, where she wandered off toward the Natural History Wing and was almost accidentally locked in at closing. We found her knocking politely on a staff-only fire door. I was communing with a moa skeleton, she explained. Time got slippery. That evening, back on the ship, the wind howled across the decks, rattling railings and slamming doors with the dramatic flair of a haunted theater production. I stood by the balcony watching the hills of Wellington flicker under fast-moving clouds. I don't think Wellington cares if we understand it, I told Ellen. No, she said, wrapping her new scarf around her shoulders. But it made sure we noticed. Christchurch was green, quiet, and oddly kind. After the kinetic storm of Wellington, it felt like someone had turned down the volume and handed the city a book. Trees lined the boulevards like guardians. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, clipped grass, and something gently floral. Even the cars seemed to drive more politely. Feels like a city made out of Sunday afternoons, Ellen said. Or like it just woke up from something serious, I replied. We started in the Botanic Gardens, which may be the only place on earth where the ducks are dignified and the roses seem to have personal goals. Ellen walked slowly among the beds, reading every Latin name aloud like it was a spell. Stan wandered into the fern garden and returned with a vaguely haunted look. I think something back there judged me for my energy, he muttered. We passed by the site of the Christchurch Cathedral, partially ruined in the 2011 earthquake, now partially restored. Next to it stood the cardboard cathedral, made of thick paper tubes, steel and hope. I stepped inside. It was quiet, soft, oddly warm. The ceiling creaked like it was remembering something. Light filtered through colored glass like an apology, and I stood there, unexpectedly undone, by the fragility, by the design, by the fact that someone decided this, of all things, could still be a church. Denise came back from an old-fashioned tea shop in the city center, full of stories. There was a duck on the patio, she said, and a vicar trying to explain crypto to someone's grandmother. Which one did you talk to? Both. The vicar was losing. At the earthquake memorial, a row of white chairs stood in the grass, each one different. Some tall, some child-sized, some strangely familiar. We didn't talk much. Stan, usually the first to crack a joke, stood perfectly still. Later on the walk back, he said, "It's weird, seeing a city that got broken," and then decided not to stay that way. We nodded. There wasn't much else to add. That night, the Grand Odyssey pulled slowly away from port, and Christchurch faded under a canopy of soft lights and steady trees. Ellen leaned on the rail beside me, holding her scarf like it was something inherited. Some places are loud about their pain, she said. This one just grows things through it. Dunedin felt like someone had taken a chunk of Scotland, given it cliffs and sea lions, and then wrapped it in a blanket of polite gloom. It was cold. Not rude cold, poetic cold. The kind that makes you want to write letters in longhand and drink tea you don't actually enjoy. I can see my breath, Stan said, exhaling dramatically. You could do that in Vancouver in March, Denise said. Yes, but here it means something. We arrived in town just in time to see a pipe band march past the port gates. Bagpipes blaring, kilts swaying, faces solemn in a way that dared you to smirk. I didn't know I needed this, Ellen whispered. We wandered up and down the streets, most of them slanted at angles more appropriate for stunt driving. Ellen detoured to the Dunedin railway station, a black and white Gothic beast of a building that looked like it was trying to finish an opera. Inside it was all mosaic tiles, arches, and history smelling faintly of wet limestone and scones. She spent 20 minutes taking photos of carved staircases and whispering architectural trivia to herself. I bought a postcard from a man who looked like he hadn't blinked since 2004. Meanwhile, Stan got pulled into what he thought was a street festival, but turned out to be a student protest about tuition hikes. He emerged an hour later with a pamphlet and a slice of vegan banana bread. I think I stood in the wrong place and accidentally made a statement, he said. I spent the afternoon browsing a shop that sold jackets of substance, not windbreakers, not light layers, jackets that meant something. I tried on a navy wool peacoat, too heavy, a charcoal trench, too noir, Then a waxed canvas field jacket and green-brown, mid-thigh, pockets for days, like something Hemingway would wear to a disappointing lunch. I bought it without hesitation. I didn't need it, but I suddenly fit it. That evening, we joined a local guide for a walk to see the penguin colony on the Otago Peninsula. There they were, little yellow-eyed misanthropes, waddling across the beach like grumpy shopkeepers closing up early. I love them, Bobby whispered. They hate you, the guide whispered back. The wind came off the water like a sideways memory. My new jacket held it off. It wasn't warm, exactly, but I didn't need to be. For the first time on this whole trip, I didn't feel like I was borrowing the weather. I was in it. There are places you visit, and there are places that visit you. Fjordland was the second kind. We entered the Sound before dawn. Fog wrapped the ship like a thought you forgot how to finish. By the time the sun tried to rise, we were already drifting between walls of green stone, water as black as tea, and peaks so steep they looked like someone had tried to fold the land and then changed their mind halfway through. No voices, no towns, no birdsong, just the hush of engine and the vast, echoing silence of a world that doesn't know you're here. I think we've sailed into someone else's dream, Ellen whispered beside me on the observation deck. Or a dream that used to belong to Earth, I said. Stan joined us, coffee in hand, already wearing a hat with a regrettable slogan, New Zealand, more sheep than sense. He gestured at a waterfall tumbling from what looked like a cloud's own shoulder. That one's Jeff, he said. The cliff, I mean. He looks like a Jeff. I didn't argue. It felt too sacred to correct, even in stupidity. Denise joined us quietly. Her umbrella, last seen surviving the high winds of Wellington, now hung half-collapsed from her wrist like a wounded bird. I'm going to give it a Viking funeral, she said. In the fjord? Ellen asked. No, in the bathtub. We cruised slowly through Milford Sound, then Doubtful Sound, which sounds like a place invented for a metaphor, and probably was. The mist thickened. The cliffs leaned closer. Rain fell in slow-motion streaks, as if gravity itself was still deciding whether to commit. At one point, Ellen walked alone to the bow. She stood there for nearly 20 minutes, unmoving. Later, she told me she wasn't thinking, wasn't meditating, wasn't contemplating. She was just letting the fjord be the loudest thing. That night, we didn't have a formal dinner. We just sat in the lounge, soft music playing, plates of soup and bread, everyone a little quieter than usual. Bobby said, "It's like it got inside me." No one needed to ask what she meant. I stepped out onto the upper deck alone before bed. The cliffs had vanished into the dark. Only the water remained, glinting faintly under the ship's lights, as quiet as a held breath. And I thought, if there is a hollow place in the world where the noise stops, we just passed through it, and it let us go. Hobart was like finding an old book on a high shelf, dusty, strange, and full of things you're not sure you were supposed to read. We stepped off the ship into brisk air, the kind that felt like it had swept through a few prisons before reaching you. You can feel the history, Denise said. I can feel my sinuses, Stan replied, zipping his jacket. The Museum of Old and New Art, known locally as MONA, sat halfway up a bluff, looking vaguely defensive in its architecture. I think it's built to withstand judgment, Ellen said as we approached. Inside it was part catacomb, part billionaire's anxiety dream. One room featured a machine that simulated digestion. Another was just a long red corridor with a wall full of real human teeth. Stan stood in front of the teeth, eating a sandwich he was probably not supposed to have brought in. I don't know what this is trying to say, he said. Maybe it's just saying I have your teeth, I replied. Ellen, having wisely exited the exhibit early, wandered into the gin tasting room, which turned out to be run by a former ethics lecturer named Trudy. Trudy poured us shots of lavender-infused gin while explaining the Kantian dilemma of labeling alcohol as medicinal. This is medicinal, Ellen said, sipping. So is oblivion, Trudy said. Would you like the citrus one? Denise bought a Mona-branded tote bag and was promptly dive-bombed by a raven on the way out. I think I've been chosen, she said, not quite joking. Back in town, Stan bought a sweater from a shop that smelled like cedarwood and secrets. It was wool, navy, too long in the sleeves, and exactly what a 19th century lighthouse keeper would have worn during an existential crisis. It fits weird, he said. It fits your soul, Ellen replied. He kept it. The museum gift shop, curiously, had nothing in it. One wall had 4 books. The other wall had a mirror. That was it. I think I've been judged, I said. You have, Bobby confirmed, by a shelving unit. That night we stood on the upper deck as Hobart's sandstone buildings glowed under gas lamps and the faint hum of ferry horns echoed across the harbor. I looked at the stone, the water, the gaps between. I think this place remembers things, I said. Ellen touched my arm. Then we should be careful what we leave behind. Melbourne wasn't just a city. It was a mood board with a tram system. We stepped off the ship and into perfectly ironic sunshine, the kind that made even the pigeons look caffeinated. Feels like a place where everyone has an opinion about bread, I said. Only if they also have a podcast, Bobby added. We split up almost immediately, not out of conflict. Melbourne just encouraged fragmentation. You didn't explore it so much as get absorbed into it. Ellen and Denise vanished down a laneway lined with secondhand bookstores and shops selling tweed things. Stan was last seen chasing a sign that read, 10-minute tattoo or your regret is free. I wandered into a cafe that looked like a warehouse and smelled like ambition. I stood before a bakery case for an indecent amount of time. There were 14 types of muffins. Each had a description longer than some of my past relationships. I panicked. Then I pointed. Then I sat. The muffin was beetroot and cacao. It was good in the way a confession can be good. Dense, unsure, possibly healthy, emotionally complicated. I took a bite and thought, maybe I overthink things to avoid feeling them. Then I ordered a flat white and immediately spilled it on my pants. Balance. Ellen texted me a photo of a bookstore cat named Jeffrey and a quote from the clerk. We file the existentialists under weathered optimism. I replied, my muffin knows my secrets. Stan reappeared at lunch with a mural photo and a glazed expression. I stood in an alley so beautiful I forgot my name for 6 minutes, he said. Are you okay? I think I'm a mural now. Denise arrived late, holding a notebook and looking suspiciously pleased. I went to a poetry reading, she said. There were beanbags. No one spoke to me. I loved it. What was the best line? She flipped a page. The moon is a rental. We all nodded. That sounded about right. We spent the afternoon walking slowly through the Fitzroy Gardens, where every tree seemed to have heard your secrets but decided not to judge. At one point, I sat on a bench with a fresh muffin, carrot this time, less existential, and watched 2 old men play chess under a fig tree. Neither spoke. Each move was a kind of punctuation mark in a sentence I'd never understand. I didn't need to. That night, we stood on the observation deck as Melbourne's skyline faded behind tram wires and amber streetlights. Do you ever get the feeling, I said, that cities choose what version of themselves they show you? Ellen smiled. Maybe they just wait to see who you are first. Adelaide was the kind of place that had already folded the napkins before you arrived. Clean, orderly, quiet, not boring, just content in a way that made you wonder if you were the one fidgeting too much. It was impeccably walkable, shaded sidewalks, modest churches, cafes with both vegan croissants and well-behaved dogs. I think I'm calmer just being here, Bobby said. Stan sneezed and said it was allergies. It was probably the wine. We broke into loose pairs again. Ellen wanted to explore North Terrace solo, the museums, the galleries, the feeling of being unaccompanied by conversation. Denise signed up for a conscious breathing circle at a yoga studio that played harp music through a Bluetooth speaker disguised as a quartz crystal. Stan and Bruce headed out for a vineyard tour in the Adelaide Hills, where by his own account, Stan learned how to taste feelings in wine. It's earthy, he said later. What does that mean? I asked. It means I want to sit under a tree and apologize to someone. I ended up at the Art Gallery of South Australia, mostly because it was air-conditioned and not trying to sell me an acai bowl. The building was quiet, pale, and spacious, like a very polite dream. I wandered aimlessly at first, then less so. Eventually, I stopped in front of a painting I still couldn't describe hours later. Large, abstract, mostly blue. It looked like a cloud had decided to try therapy and hadn't quite finished. I stood there for a long time, and something in me, something usually noisy, just sat down. Not in defeat, not in awe, just in acknowledgement, like it had finally accepted its own shape. Later, I found Ellen outside the library, holding a small paperback and a flat white. We didn't speak right away. We just walked through Botanic Park, where fig trees loomed like dignified secrets, and the wind moved gently between them. Denise met us for dinner, looking both confused and well-rested. "I think I meditated," she said, "or maybe I just napped very slowly." Back on the ship, Stan stared at the ceiling in the lounge and declared, "I need fewer opinions." Ellen raised a glass to that. So did I. And for once, nobody tried to explain what they meant. Fremantle was all sun-bleached stone and sea air that didn't apologize. It didn't try to charm you. It didn't need to. It had conviction, in every sense of the word. "Everything here feels built to last," Ellen said, shading her eyes with a flat white. "Or built to keep people in," I replied. We were standing outside the Fremantle prison, a former convict-built institution turned historic site, complete with high limestone walls and a brochure that used the word gritty uncomfortably often. The tour guide was named Rick, and he had the calm, clipped delivery of someone who's told the same horrifying stories 3,000 times. "This wing was known as the punishment yard," he said cheerfully. "To the right is the gallows room. Please, no flash photography." We filed in. It smelled like dust and something older than dust. Stan whispered, "Bet this place is haunted." Rick said, "It is. Don't touch anything." Denise touched something. No one was surprised. Ellen walked ahead of the group, reading every plaque, peering into empty cells, with a face like she was trying to hear something that hadn't spoken in years. I kept near the back. Something about the place made my neck feel heavier. Not fear, just recognition. There were scratched initials in the walls, a worn wooden bench, a blank iron toilet in the corner of a stone room. And for reasons I still can't explain, I stood in that room and felt like I had waited there once. Not in this life, probably. Maybe not in any. But something in me remembered stillness. Outside, the light felt too bright. Denise fanned herself with her tour map and said, "I touched a hook in the gallows room." It buzzed. "Electricity?" Ellen asked. "No, regret." We wandered back toward the port in silence. Not sad, just saturated. Fremantle didn't perform history. It held it quietly, like a palm full of rough coins. Later, we sat at a dockside bar, the sails of fishing boats clacking gently in the breeze. Stan drank something green and said, "That prison felt like it was still waiting for someone." "Maybe us," Ellen said. "No," I said. "I think we were just passing through." But it watched us the whole time. Bali hit us in the face like a scented pillow thrown by a well-meaning cousin. It was hot, humid, and gorgeous in the kind of way that dares you to complain just so it can watch you sweat through your travel linen. The air smelled like burnt jasmine, damp stone, and clove cigarettes. The sidewalks were alive with offerings, tiny woven trays of rice, flowers, and crackers laid at thresholds and intersections. "Are these for the gods?" Stan asked. Ellen nodded. "Or for the idea that someone might be watching." Our guide, a cheerful man named Dewa, wore mirrored sunglasses and a t-shirt that said "It's all a practice." He said things like, "In Bali, the answer is sometimes yes, even if it's no. The traffic is not chaotic. It's just dancing. If you hear a rooster, it means something is alive nearby." None of this helped when Stan rented a scooter. 15 minutes later, Stan had the 1. Nearly reversed into a street dog. 2. Mistaken a temple entrance for a parking lot. 3. Attempted to honk and instead activated a setting that played La Cucaracha. He returned the scooter voluntarily. Everyone agreed it was for the best. Meanwhile, Ellen and I walked through the Pura Taman Ayun temple, barefoot and slow, the air heavy with incense and history. The moss-covered shrines leaned like old listeners. The lotus ponds shimmered in the heat, and the stone carvings stared at us with blank, content expressions. I don't think I've ever been this warm and calm at the same time, Ellen whispered. I nodded. Then my calf cramped. Balance again. That afternoon, I went for a Balinese massage, which involved being pounded with herbs and kindness by a woman named Ketut, who laughed every time I winced. You hold too much in your back, she said. How do you know? Because I've been pushing on it for an hour and it's still angry. When it was done, I lay there, limp and slightly damp, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not relaxed, not rejuvenated, just allowed. Denise returned to the ship wearing a crown of frangipani blossoms she'd received from a teenage girl at a temple. She said I had old flower spirit, Denise told us. Was that a compliment? I took it as one. That evening, as we sailed past the cliffs of Uluwatu, I stood at the railing and listened to the waves crack against stone that had no opinion about me. The air smelled of wood smoke and sea, and I thought, maybe peace isn't silence. Maybe it's letting the noise happen and not needing to flinch. Cochin was not a city so much as a living museum with excellent seafood. The moment we stepped off the gangway, the air hit us like a scented towel soaked in molasses. Warm, spiced, dense enough to chew. I feel like I'm being slow cooked, Bobby muttered. Denise fanned herself with a brochure that had already wilted. We walked past colonial Portuguese buildings, their yellow plaster peeled by centuries of humidity and Dutch regret. Chinese fishing nets dipped into the bay like spider webs designed by engineers with a flair for melancholy. Stan pointed at one and said, "That's either genius or art, possibly both." I nodded. Definitely the slowest way to not catch fish. We wandered into the spice market, and the scent hit us like punctuation. Cinnamon, tamarind, clove, coriander, a blast of turmeric that nearly made Stan sneeze himself into a theological debate. At one stall, I tried to buy a small jar of saffron. Somehow this turned into a lengthy conversation about my family structure, interest in marriage, and whether I preferred chicken korma or vindaloo. I bought 2 jars and a scarf I didn't remember choosing. Ellen disappeared into a courtyard performance of Kathakali, traditional dance drama with makeup that looked like it had been applied by myth itself. When I found her again, she was seated cross-legged on a floor mat, smiling in that slow way she does when the world has outdone itself. "It's not storytelling," she whispered. "It's spellcasting." Stan tried to convince us he now understood British colonial guilt after touring Fort Kochi. "I get it now," he said, holding a ginger soda. "Do you?" Ellen asked. "No, but I know I should." Denise, for reasons known only to her, became intensely fixated on buying the best cardamom available. She sniffed 10 varieties. She made a merchant repeat his pitch 3 times. She bartered using compliments. "I'm not proud," she said, holding a small velvet pouch. "But I won." That evening, we watched the sun dissolve into the Arabian Sea as the fishing nets rose one final time. They lifted not triumphantly, but patiently, as if they weren't meant to catch anything, but simply to be seen, to say, "We're still here." I stood at the edge of the pier, feeling the salt on my skin, the cinnamon in my breath. And I thought, some cities don't tell you who they are. They just invite you to sit beside them while they exhale. Mumbai didn't exhale. It roared. From the moment we stepped off the gangway and into the port terminal, it felt like we'd walked into a symphony that had started 3 hours ago and was now in full, glorious crescendo. Horns, wheels, yelling, bells, rain on metal, a distant chant, and above it all, the smell of diesel, rosewater, grilled onions, and 7 distinct kinds of incense. Stan blinked. "I think my nervous system is trying to reboot." We took cabs, plural, to the gateway of India, where pigeons wheel in great arrogant flocks, and tourists take selfies in heat-stretched shadows. The structure itself looked like an arch, trying to remember how to breathe. Ellen stood in front of it for a long time. She wasn't reading plaques. She wasn't taking photos. She was just watching, letting the size of it pass through her. "It's not really a gate," she said at last. "It's a declaration." I didn't ask of what. She seemed to be answering something bigger. We split up for a while. Stan, somewhat inexplicably, insisted on riding the Mumbai local train system. He returned 2 hours later, covered in a light film of sweat, perspective, and someone else's newspaper. "Have you ever been elbowed in the soul?" he asked. Denise and I tried street chai from a vendor who poured it from an absurd height while not looking at it at all. It came in tiny clay cups and tasted like comfort, pepper, and prophecy. Denise took one sip and said, "I suddenly understand my great-aunt's opinions about marriage." Ellen wandered into Calaba Market and bought a set of bracelets from a woman who insisted on telling her 4 fortunes. They were: 1. You will live a long time. 2. You will leave too soon. 3. Someone you love is waiting. 4. You've already missed them. "I think that covered everything," Ellen said. At sunset, we sat on Marine Drive, the Queen's Necklace, watching the city light itself from the bottom up. Beneath us, waves slapped concrete. Beside us, teenagers took selfies and grandparents dozed. Behind us, millions of lives moved at once. I looked out over the Arabian Sea, and for the first time all day, I didn't feel like I needed to understand where I was. I just had to keep moving with it. Goa came with a soundtrack, part ocean, part motorbike, part acoustic guitar from somewhere slightly too far away to shush. It was hot, but not aggressive. Sunny, but dappled. Relaxed, but vaguely alert, like the universe was watching you nap with one eye open. We arrived in Old Goa first. Ellen insisted on visiting the Basilica of Bom Jesus, where the remains of a 16th century saint were displayed in a glass case like some kind of divine museum exhibit. "It's beautiful," she said. "You mean the church?" "Yes. Also the idea of believing in something hard enough to put bones in a box and call it peace." I didn't argue. I mostly stared at the ceiling. Later, we wandered through crumbling Portuguese mansions and tree-lined courtyards where vines grew like memories no one had the heart to trim. Denise found a beachside pop-up selling sarongs dyed with turmeric and flower petals. She tried one on, spun once, and declared herself healed. "No further explanation," she added. We didn't ask. Stan got roped into a drum circle by a man named Rishi who sold marinated pineapple and claimed to have once been a dentist. He came back dazed and smelling like lime. "I might be rhythm now," he said. I found a hammock tied between 2 palm trees and lay in it with a paper plate of fish curry and coconut rice. And for maybe 20 full minutes, I didn't want to fix or plan or narrate anything. The sun filtered through palm fronds and little golden flickers. The breeze smelled like roasted cumin and sunscreen. A bird somewhere said the same 3 notes over and over again like it knew I needed it. I didn't have any answers, but I wasn't asking questions either, and that felt new. Ellen bought a postcard and tucked it in her bag without writing anything on it. She smiled at me when I noticed. "Some things don't need to be sent," she said. That night, the ship pulled out of Mormugao port. The shoreline, a flicker of palms and warm windows, and one faint guitar solo trying to make its point. "I think that was the first place that didn't ask anything of me," I said. Ellen leaned on the rail beside me. "It gave you a hammock," she said, "and it let you rest in it. That's more than most places manage." Mombasa greeted us with sweat and spice and stone. It wasn't aggressive. It didn't need to be. It had already survived everything. We stepped off the gangway into a port thick with humidity, distant drumbeats, and the slow-rolling smell of clove, charcoal, salt, and sun-warmed limestone. Stan sniffed. "I smell mystery." "You smell goats and grilled corn," Bobby replied. "The mystery's just efficient." We wandered into the old town, a maze of narrow alleys and centuries-old coral stone buildings whose elaborately carved doors seemed to lead into other dimensions, or at least excellent tea shops. A boy selling bracelets pointed at one of the doors and said, "That one has a ghost." Stan took 2 steps back. We found ourselves inside a guest house cafe, all shadowed courtyards, thick stone walls, and lanterns hanging from exposed beams. It felt like somewhere time had sat down for a long nap. Denise ordered ginger tea and bought a packet of whole nutmeg, then said she heard someone humming from the next room. There was no one there. I left the group for a while and just walked. No destination, no map. Just following the turn of a corner, the slope of a street, the smell of coconut oil and grilled maize. I ended up near Fort Jesus, where crumbling battlements faced out to sea like someone still expected invaders. There was an old man sketching the coastline on a page the wind kept trying to take. He nodded at me once, then went back to drawing. I stayed silent beside him. Meanwhile, Ellen was crouched beside a one-eyed cat near a spice stall, feeding it scraps of samosa. "This is General Meow," she said. "He's claimed this part of the city in the name of softness." She didn't explain further. No one asked her to. That evening, we returned to the guest house for drinks and watched the light fade over Mombasa Creek. Something about the air shifted around sunset. Not cooler, just older, like it remembered things we didn't. On the way back to the ship, Denise paused outside the carved door again. She whispered, "It's not haunted." Then she leaned in and added, "It's just not done speaking yet." Zanzibar smelled like stories, not metaphors, actual stories, as if the air had soaked them in and now breathed them back at you, one exhale at a time. We stepped off the tender boat into Stone Town, and within seconds, I was swallowed whole by heat, jasmine, cardamom, diesel, and the faint smell of history left too long in the sun. The streets didn't curve, they slipped. They whispered and narrowed and turned suddenly into plazas where cats stretched beneath colonial balconies, and old men debated rhythm and revolution over card games and mango juice. Everywhere, music, always faint, always nearby, sometimes guitar, sometimes called a prayer, sometimes just a wooden drum tapping like a second heartbeat. Ellen vanished almost immediately. She reappeared later with a hand-drawn map, 2 silver rings, and the scent of rosewater and knowing things she wasn't ready to explain. "I had tea with a man who said time is only a suggestion," she said. "We listened to the same song twice. He said it was different the second time. He was right. Stan got a henna tattoo of a geometric mandala on his forearm and then sat down dramatically on a rooftop cushion and said, 'This represents my inner labyrinth.'" "You're not that complicated," Denise replied. "You don't know that," he said. Denise was negotiating with a man in a linen tunic over a bottle of oud perfume she did not need and a woven basket of whole cloves. At one point, they both smiled like something unspoken had gone entirely according to plan. "Did you flirt?" I asked. "I bartered emotionally," she said. "I wandered into the Anglican cathedral, built atop the foundations of the former slave market. The whipping post still marked. A circle of cold stone in a warm world. I didn't take photos. I didn't write anything down. I just stood there a while and felt things I hadn't scheduled. That night we gathered at a rooftop cafe strung with low lanterns and hammocks that no one trusted enough to use. The air was warm, the night was close, and the city below still sang, faint, rising, and full of everything it remembered. "I think this place is trying to teach me something," I said. Ellen passed me a small cup of cardamom coffee. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Victoria, Seychelles was the quietest capital city I've ever met. It didn't bustle, it didn't assert, it lounged. Even the roosters seemed unhurried, and the only building over 3 stories was the one shaped like a pineapple. We disembarked under a sky that looked like a watercolor someone forgot to finish, and within 15 minutes, we were standing in front of a customs desk, filling out forms that asked us to declare whether we had visited a farm recently, if we were carrying honey, and if we had ever been in proximity to exotic birds. Denise wrote emotionally yes and crossed it out. While everyone else moved through, I got held up over a stamp discrepancy from a layover in Malaysia. It wasn't serious, just tedious. A stern but sleepy woman named Adele made me sit in a side room with an oscillating fan and a framed portrait of a former minister who looked deeply unconvinced about everything. Eventually, Adele returned with a new form, a firm smile, and a cup of mango juice. "You wait well," she said. "I've had practice." The others had dispersed by then. I wandered into the botanical gardens, where tortoises blinked in slow motion, and breadfruit trees leaned like they were whispering gossip between species. Stan waved me over from under a tree. "I think these tortoises are judging me," he said. "In a spiritual way." Ellen had found a wooden bench by a koi pond and was fanning herself with a woven palm leaf fan. "I don't want to do anything," she said. "Not in a lazy way, just in a correct way." I sat beside her. The koi swam like punctuation. A small gecko blinked at us from the shade. This place doesn't seem to care what time it is, I said. That's because it already knows, she replied. And it's fine. Denise reappeared with a canvas bag full of cinnamon bark and a long-stemmed hibiscus tucked behind one ear. I met a woman who told me everything here grows sideways, she said, even time. Back on the ship, just before we sailed out, I watched a pair of local teenagers fish from the harbor wall using a string, a paperclip, and a grin that didn't require results. They caught nothing and didn't seem to mind, and I thought, some places aren't trying to show you anything. They're just letting you exist, and that's enough. Nosy Bee was green in a way that made other greens feel lazy. It didn't just bloom, it bragged. Vines tangled in telephone wires, flowers exploded out of cracks in stone walls, and the air was so thick with ylang ylang that it felt like walking through someone else's memory. We split up at the edge of Lokobi Reserve, where the jungle began like a sentence nobody intended to finish. Stan went off in search of lemurs, muttering something about spiritual rebirth and Instagram. Denise drifted toward a rum distillery with a handwritten sign and a friendly man offering samples before 10 a.m. Ellen and I followed a guide named Leva, who wore rubber boots and a smile of deep, patient tolerance. 30 minutes into the hike, Ellen stopped in the middle of the trail, surrounded by the scent of ylang ylang and humming insects, and burst into tears. I'm not sad, she said, fanning her face. It just feels like I'm remembering something that didn't happen to me. Neither of us knew what that meant, but the jungle did. And it didn't argue. I kept walking alone after that, the path narrowing, the vines thickening, the light shifting from green to gold to nothing at all. Somewhere near a fig tree with roots like elbows, it started to rain. Not gently, not apologetically, just absolutely. I crouched beneath a palm, soaked and blinking, and had what I believe was either 1, a mild jungle fever, 2, a rum hangover I hadn't earned yet, 3, a legitimate epiphany. I thought, maybe I don't need to understand anything. Maybe understanding is just the polite cousin of control. Maybe being here, cold, wet, confused, was exactly the point. Then something squawked nearby and I tripped on a root. Epiphany over. When I rejoined the others, Stan had a lemur on his shoulder and was feeding it banana chips. We're bonding, he said. We've been through a lot together. You met him 10 minutes ago. He trusts me. The lemur stared at me with slow, ancient judgment. Denise emerged from the distillery with a glass bottle labeled simply YES. What's in it? I asked. Joy, mistakes, ginger. She took a sip, immediately hiccuped. Back on the ship, we watched Nosy Bee fade into a blur of jungle and cloud, the scent of ylang ylang still in our clothes. Ellen held her scarf up to her nose and said softly, It's like I left part of myself there I didn't know I had. Then she folded it away, like she might come back for it someday. Maputo felt like a city still in the middle of a sentence, phrases half painted on walls, songs echoing from courtyards, unfinished, a traffic light blinking red into an intersection where no one stopped. It was bold, it was loud, it was a little broken, but in the way a person is after they've gotten back up 5 times too many and still know how to smile about it. We arrived in the afternoon, and by dinner time I had 1, seen a goat in a bookstore, 2, accidentally walked into a political rally I mistook for a parade, 3, been offered 3 bracelets, 2 beers, and a mysterious stew in a dented thermos, all from the same man. Ellen dragged me into an art gallery that had once been a colonial mansion and still smelled faintly of plaster and rebellion. Inside were bold, aching canvases, color upon color, that didn't explain themselves but still made you feel like you owed them something. This city paints like it remembers how it used to be, Ellen said, and doesn't know what to do with that. I asked her what she meant. She just pointed at a painting of a woman walking away from a crumbling doorway. That's how it feels here, she said. Like you're walking through your own story and someone else's at the same time. Stan got invited to dance in the Praça da Independencia during a Marabenta performance and immediately tried to copy the rhythm, failed, tried again, and somehow hurt his ankle and his dignity at the same time. I think I strained my ability to understand syncopation, he said. No one was watching, Bobby assured him. They always watch," Stan said grimly. Denise got into an argument about global trade structures with a street vendor named Manuel who sold carved animals and hand-painted spoons. They debated for 20 minutes. She asked hard questions. He countered with better ones. She walked away with a carved spoon and half a grin. "I like him," she said. "He made me rethink things. Also, this spoon is haunted. I got lost briefly, not geographically, but visually. There was a wall, covered in paint, paper, cloth, charcoal, handprints, newspaper. I stood there for what felt like an hour, because it didn't tell a story. It refused to. It just kept speaking in color, over and over. We boarded the ship that night with dusty shoes, sticky fingers, and brains that felt 2 degrees off kilter. "You know what this city feels like?" Ellen said as we watched the shoreline fade. "No," I admitted. She smiled. "It feels like the middle of the book." Cape Town looked like a city built on an inhale. It rose out of the coastline in soft stone, sharp angles, and small, impossible gardens clinging to cliffs. And above it all, Table Mountain, flat, immense, unapologetic. It didn't loom, it didn't demand, it simply was, which made it somehow more powerful. We took the aerial cableway to the summit, and as we rose, the entire city unfolded behind us like a map being slowly explained. At the top, the view didn't shock me. It stilled me. The sea went on forever. The wind tried to remember something. The rock was cold beneath my hand, and no one said anything for almost 5 minutes. Even Stan, even Denise, which tells you everything. Later, Ellen and I walked through the District 6 Museum, where photographs and notes from displaced families filled the old church with a sadness that didn't ask for sympathy, just acknowledgement. She stood in front of a display case filled with household keys. "These unlocked homes that don't exist anymore," she said. And I thought, not for the first time, that grief doesn't always howl. Sometimes it catalogs. Stan, of course, had gone to a wine tasting. He returned an hour later with a bottle of Chenin Blanc, a red nose, and a new theory about metaphorical terroir. "I think I can taste the soil's childhood trauma," he said. "Maybe drink water next," I suggested. Denise was late coming back to the ship. She showed up at the last minute with a canvas painting of a whale floating above a shanty town, strings tied to the rooftops like it was lifting the whole place into the sky. "This makes me feel things I don't want to name," she said. "Like what?" "Exactly." That night, we sat on the upper deck with fleece blankets and rooibos tea, watching Cape Town dissolve behind us into gold-lit fog and shadows. Ellen turned to me and asked, "Do you think we'll remember this the way it actually was?" "I think we'll remember it the way it asked us to." Walvis Bay was shaped like silence, not the absence of sound, no. There were birds and breeze and the occasional cough of a distant truck. But it was the kind of silence that feels curated, like the world took time to clear its throat before letting you in. We disembarked under a bone-pale sky where the sun wasn't shining so much as waiting. Ellen stood on the dock and blinked at the horizon, where sand met sky with no visible seam. "It looks fake," she said. "It looks like we fell out of a photo book," I replied. We took a short drive to Dune 7, which the locals insisted was the tallest in Namibia, and possibly the continent, though no one seemed eager to die on that hill, literally or figuratively. Ellen began climbing, quietly, deliberately, like she was going somewhere no one else needed to follow. She didn't come down for nearly an hour. When she did, she had sand in her eyelashes and a new crease in her smile. "I needed the perspective," she said. "Good view?" "No, just emptiness, in the best possible way." Meanwhile, Stan had acquired a battered snowboard from a man named Marius and attempted to sand surf down a slope that was frankly more vertical than anyone in our group should have trusted. He made it halfway before veering sideways into the path of a French family having lunch on a tarp. He emerged with an apology, a sandwich, and a red face that lasted the rest of the afternoon. Denise, inexplicably, found a fossil vendor on the edge of the salt pans. She bought a spiral-shaped ammonite encased in rock and insisted it was giving her very ancient energy. "It hums," she said. "It's a rock. It judges you." I walked alone along the salt flats, where the world had flattened itself into a watercolor of white, blue, and wind. I saw a pelican standing at the edge of the shallows like it was thinking about regret, and for a moment I thought, what if this is the only place in the world that's not trying to become something? What if it just is? And what if that's enough? That night, back on the ship, Ellen passed me a handful of warm sand she'd kept in her pocket. She let it fall into my palm, soft, grain by grain. Everything changes, she said, but not all at once. Luanda felt like a city mid-exhale, but the breath kept catching. One moment, you're walking past a colonial fort with sea-pitted walls. The next, a BMW dealership towers over a market selling mangoes and mismatched shoes. I counted 3 skyscrapers and 7 burned-out husks of buildings on the same street. The heat pressed down like someone laying a warm, wet towel over your brain. Stan claimed he was melting into perspective. We left him under an awning with a guava soda and a suspiciously motivational newspaper. Ellen and I wandered along the marginal, Luanda's beachside promenade. We passed joggers, couples, kids kicking a ball, and a statue of a Portuguese sailor no one seemed to like. At one point, Ellen stopped and stared at a mural that stretched the entire side of a shipping warehouse. A woman, larger than life, carrying a radio in one hand and a child in the other, her body made of city fragments, glass, rust, barbed wire, and flowers. She looks tired, Ellen said. She looks like she's still doing it anyway, I replied. Later, she went to a gallery housed in a former prison. When she returned, she was quieter than usual. I think art is how this place processes memory, she said. Not to forget, but so it doesn't rot. I found a stall selling grilled fish wrapped in newspaper and ate it on the curb, while a preacher argued with a taxi driver about Jesus and oil prices. It was the best meal I'd had in a week. Denise vanished for 3 hours. When she returned, she was barefoot, wearing a sash of gold fabric and humming something slow and full of rhythm. I think I danced at someone's wedding. You think? There was cake. No one told me to leave. Stan returned with counterfeit Ray-Bans and a theory about economic instability. They're fake, I said. So is trickle down, he replied. That night, we stood on the deck and watched Luanda flicker. The lights were uneven. The skyline glinted. Something exploded, probably a firework. Or maybe not. It was beautiful and uneasy, like someone rebuilding a palace out of memory and debt. I don't know what to make of it, I admitted. Maybe don't, Ellen said. Maybe just let it be a city and let it keep going. Pointe Noire didn't say hello. It nodded. The air smelled like salt and diesel and something being grilled in coconut oil. Not quite fish, not quite meat, not quite something I was brave enough to ask about. The port was rough, industrial, cranes and bulk carriers and shipping containers stacked like forgotten Jenga towers. The town unspooled beyond it like a shrug of palm trees, concrete and quiet. No postcards and no grand cathedrals, no curated experience, just place. Stan wandered into a side street and tried to buy a goat from a teenager named Alain. She said her name is Vachette, he explained, petting the goat behind the ears. That means little cow, Denise said. Well, Stan replied gravely, she contains multitudes. Ellen disappeared again. She does that in cities that hum instead of speak. She returned 2 hours later with a notebook, 2 new earrings, and a story about a cafe where everything, the walls, the chairs, even the sugar bowls, was painted blue. There was a man reading poetry aloud to no one, she said. I asked what it was about. He said, the sky before it breaks. Then she ordered a hibiscus soda and stared at the wall until it made sense. I tried to find a market. I ended up in a neighborhood where people looked at me like I was lost and also like I should have known better. But no one was unkind. A woman handed me grilled plantain without asking. A man told me the name of the neighborhood twice, once in French, once in a language I didn't catch. He didn't explain the difference. I didn't ask. It felt like I didn't need to. Denise stood in front of a mural painted on corrugated tin, just a single word in white script, Mumbote. She traced it with her finger, then said, someone told me it means hello, peace, welcome, but not quite. It also means something you feel in your chest before you speak. She wrote it on her arm with a pen. Just so I don't forget what it doesn't mean. We left that night under a sky so clear it made the stars feel indecent. No big thoughts, no summary, just the faint smell of charcoal on our clothes, and the knowledge that something had shifted, even if we couldn't say what. Ellen just smiled and said, "Some places don't change you. They just reveal the part that was already changing." Libreville was green but not jungly, more like an airport built in a botanical garden. Palms lined the boulevards like they'd just had their nails done. It had both too much money and not enough furniture. Luxury cars beside crumbling sidewalks, linen shirts with frayed hems, a perfume of espresso, rain, and mild disinterest. I went looking for a haircut and walked into a shop called Le Coup Parfait. There were 4 barbers, 5 mirrors, and 6 men arguing about football and philosophy. I waited 30 minutes before anyone acknowledged me. The man who finally did was named Victor. He had opinions on European colonialism, Brazilian midfielders, and the superiority of coconut oil to whatever that nonsense is you use. I left with shorter hair, 3 book recommendations, and a small existential itch I couldn't scratch. Ellen vanished into the National Museum of Arts and Traditions, then into the rainforest garden behind it. She sent a text that said, "I'm communing with something older than opinion. Also, there's a frog with a very smug expression." We left her alone. Stan got invited onto a local radio show by a man he met at a sandwich stall who liked his shirt and asked if he had opinions about jazz. "Deep ones," Stan said. He did not. He made some up. He returned to the ship with a bag of roasted peanuts and a vague sense of having invented a new personality. Denise found a hotel rooftop bar where the pool was pink from underwater lights, and the drinks were even pinker. She ordered something called Une Femme Sérieuse, bought 2 papayas, and then decided she was done speaking for the day. She didn't look bored, just full. Libreville didn't push, didn't perform. It just was. A city-shaped sigh, a place for pausing, not posing. As we sailed away, Ellen reappeared beside me on deck and said, "I think this place is a good reminder." "Of what?" She smiled. "That you don't always need to be interesting to be worth staying in."